Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday.
Good morning.
We will call this meeting to order at 9:00 a.m. I would like to ask that as a courtesy to all and please ensure that you've silenced your cell phones. Also would like to ask and remind the directors to turn on and off your microphone when you're speaking to help with the audio and video recordings. For the record, I'll note that the public meeting notice was properly posted as required by law, and the notice of this board meeting was provided to each of the directors. Director Abraham indicated that he would not be present at the meeting. We've reached the portion of the meeting now where we set aside time to hear from you, the general public. Those interested in providing comments by filling out one of the cards available at the receptionist desk will be called to approach the podium to make their comments at this time. Is there anyone here wishing to make a public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to our agenda. Agenda item number 1, report and possible discussion on General Manager, CEO, report by David Collingsworth, General Manager, CEO. David.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We have a very good agenda for you today. It's full. Stuff that we're really excited to bring you forward and begin some discussions on. We hope to finalize our rules and regs today. We're going to have a strategic planning workshop, if you will, walk you through some of the new things that we've employed into our strategic planning process to help follow along with accountability and tracking what we're accomplishing here at the Brazos River Authority, so we're excited about that. We're going to give you a sneak peek into our 2023 budget. So we'll spend some time talking about that. David Thompson will. And then also to end the meeting today, we're going to spend a significant amount of time walking you through, now that Allens Creek is approved and purchased and owned by the BRA, what the next steps look like, a little introductory into the 404 permitting and the complexities there. So we'll spend some time talking about that also. I think you'll find that informative. As a reminder, on June the 2nd, when we come back from Memorial Day, we'll have our brown bag on the Brazos. We're going to spend some time talking about our water supply, give you a water supply update, and then also, for those that tune in, they'll get to hear a little bit about our parks and recreation and stuff around our reservoir. So we're excited about that also. We have our customer meetings coming up. Pardon me. June 21st in Cleburne, June 22nd in Round Rock, and June 23rd in Brenham. So if you're interested in attending one of those, reach out to Lisa and let her know. The purpose of that meeting, for those of you that are newer, is really a face-to-face customer meeting where we walk our customers through our spend quite a bit of time walking them through our detailed budget and talking about future projections and water rates. And we're really glad that to start having those face-to-face again and not being a virtual meeting. So, Madam Chair, that's all I have this morning. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Agenda item 2, discussion and possible action on Texas County and District Retirement System Plan, TCDRS, by Monica Willis, Human Resource Manager. Monica.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Each year I present the proposed employer contribution rate for the following calendar year. So this would be for 2023. Included with your convened materials were the summary valuation report and the plan year assessment. Both of those documents provide significant information about how our plan is managed with TCDRS. This next slide provides a comparison of the plan demographics for the 2020 to 2021 plan years and the changes. So as you can see, the funded ratio changed from 90% to 90.5% funded in 2021. And there was about a 4% increase in plan participants. Although it's not reflected in these numbers because they don't delve down so much, but the average age of our organization is actually coming down slightly, and the tenure is increasing slightly. So you may remember for the longest time we held at age 50, and so we are retiring off some folks that have been here for decades, as you know, and we're bringing in a bunch of younger folks. This next slide shows the history of the BRA contribution rate. And as you can see, for the most part, it was pretty flat up until 2022. And you may recall that in 2021, the TCDRS Board of Directors voted to reduce the investment return rate, assumption rate from 8% to 7.5%. And they also decreased the inflation assumption from 2.75% to 2.5%. So these changes will probably affect our plan for several more years, although with strong investment returns from 2021, our rate will decrease slightly in the 2023 plan year. So TCDRS has proposed an employer contribution rate of 8.83%, which will begin on January 1st, 2023. And we are not proposing any changes to the plan provisions for the 2023 plan year. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Monica? No questions.
All right, you can read the resolution.
Please read the resolution.
Be it resolved by the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority that the Texas County and District Retirement System, TCDRS, plan provisions for Brazos River Authority non-retirees remain the same for the 2023 plan year. And be it further resolved that the TCDRS plan provisions for Brazos River Authority retirees remain the same for the 2023 plan year. And be it further resolved that the required TCDRS employer contribution rate will be 8.83% for the 2023 plan year.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Motion made by Director Crone, a second by Jen Henderson. Please pull the board.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Boren,
Yes.
Director Fernandez,
Yes.
Director Geezy,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crone,
Yes.
Director LaChance,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Embro,
Yes.
Director Reese,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Agenda item number 3, that motion passes. Agenda item 3, discussion and possible action on revisions to regulations on the Brazos River Authority lakes and associated lands by Riley Woods Senior Staff Council. Riley.
Good morning. As y'all will recall, last board meeting, well, I guess not the last board meeting, but the board meeting before that in March, we brought to you revised rules and regulations for our lakes and lands. And really, probably the biggest change that was made, I'm not going to go through all of them again like I did last time, but probably the biggest change was the new process that we put in place for commercial on-water facilities, where we're going to go through a 2-step public process in order to have the opportunity for the public to weigh in on what's going on and before we make decisions. And so we put this out for public comment for a period of 30 days. And what I'm going to do today is just go over the public comments we received. We didn't receive a lot. We received 21 comments, and we have those laid out. And then, and based on those comments, there were 2 of them, maybe 3 of them that we decided to make additional changes. I'll go over those changes, and there were a couple other changes beyond that as well that we made. And so, if you'll go to the next slide. First, we had 3 comments basically in support that supported the effort that we were doing in whole. We had 3 comments on the noise produced by airboats. Those comments came up right. Actually, a couple of them were after the deadline, but we went ahead and included them. I think maybe some airboats were running around on one of the lakes and brought about the comments. And we had another comment on wanting us to regulate loud music or noise coming from watercraft. We had a comment on signage. Oh, and just so the comments that are in green are the ones that we decided to make changes based upon. The signage, we had 2 comments requesting changes and regulation to signs. And what we did here, I think primarily we had folks that didn't want there to be profanities on signs, and we had other folks that wanted to be able to put no trespassing signs on docks. So what we ended up doing was we changed actually our entire signage provision. That it used to say no signs at all except on leased land, but we actually don't really have any leased land. We have a couple, I think, commercial leases still, but those we take care of signage in the lease. So what we did is we got rid of signage in total except for no trespassing signs. Or I say in total, we got rid of signage on docks except for no trespassing signs. People can put no trespassing signs on docks, and that's the only change we made. Scuba diving, we had 1 comment regarding maybe adding additional safety features regarding scuba diving. We decided that that wasn't something that we really wanted to be regulating. We had 3 comments regarding that wasn't really about regulations, that had to do with lake levels, not wanting them to be reduced. We had 5 different comments on the operation of watercraft within 100 feet of docks. We had people who were opposed, people who were for it, people who were confused by it. I think the idea was there used to be a 50-foot dock, and that's what's in the Water Safety Act, but we're being more conservative. We've just had a number of, we're trying to be proactive because we've had over the years a lot of folks who have issues with boats going too fast close to docks, and we think going to the 100-foot makes sense. We had another comment on tramways, 2 comments on that. We've just decided to get rid of that provision altogether because we do have tramways out at Possum Kingdom, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't possibly get rid of those. So the tramways will just be evaluated on a case-by-case basis if somebody's needing one. Usually it's getting like an elevator getting from up on top of a cliff down to a dock. Boat ramps, we had 1 comment opposed to our continued prohibition on residential boat docks. And then 1 comment, we had accidentally included, we had to add a clarification that we are not performing OSSF functions, on-site sewage facility functions at Granbury. We only do it at PK and Limestone.
And for the record, the lake level bullet is not in green because we've made no changes, because there are no plans to reduce lake levels at any of our lakes.
Correct. Okay, next slide. Does anybody have any questions? We included the full comments in our write-up to you all. If anybody has questions, we can move on to the next slide. So here's the new changes that we're proposing since what you all saw last time. Rail systems, we've clarified that grandfathering of boat ramps at the lakes includes rail systems. That wasn't perfectly clear, I think, in the previous rules, and it does. The OSSF responsibility clarified that it's only at PK and Limestone. Private fuel systems, this is a prohibition on having private fuel dispensing and storage systems associated with private or residential facilities, and that was accidentally deleted out last time we showed you this. The intent was to move it down to the new section on fuel, and it accidentally got deleted. We added a new provision on chemicals that clarifies that storage and application of pesticides, herbicides, and any other harmful chemical is not going to be allowed without our express written permission. The signage that we just went over a second ago, and tramways. Next slide. So next steps. The next step will be that in order for the rules and regulations to become enforceable, first we have to publish them for 2 consecutive weeks in newspapers of general circulation at the areas where it's going to be enforced. So that's going to be at Granbury, at Possum Kingdom, and at Limestone. And there's newspapers that we generally use up there for that, and so we're going to do that. That'll have to be published for 2 consecutive weeks, and then the effective date is 5 days after that publication period is expired. And so I think due to the timing of when we have to provide notice to the newspapers based on their scheduling. We'll probably get the newspaper started not next week, but the week after that. So it'll go for 2 weeks and then 5 days after that. And in the interim, we're going to continue with the hold on processing commercial facilities until we get the new rules and regs in place. So that is it. We can go to the next slide that has the resolution, and if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. And I think we've got folks from the lakes here too that can answer questions. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question on, you mentioned publication in local newspapers. What newspaper are you going to use at Possum Kingdom?
Judy, which one is it? The Graham Leader.
The Graham Leader?
Yes.
You might consider using the Mineral Wells paper as well, just to
Okay,
be
yeah,
sure.
we can do that. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody read newspapers anymore?
Any other questions?
Riley, I just want to make a comment that thank you to you and your staff for taking the recommendation from the board, taking it out for public comment, information. Half the battle is making sure everybody understands and that there's good communication, so thank y'all for doing that.
Yeah, there was a lot of good folks working on this.
Yeah.
And I mean, the lakes were tremendously helpful in this.
Yeah.
Because they know what's going on out there.
That's right. All right, no other comments. Please read the resolution.
Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby approves and adopts the revisions to the regulations of Brazos River Authority lakes and associated lands as presented at its May 23, 2022 meeting to become effective in accordance with Texas Water Code, Chapter 51, Sections 51.127 through 130.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Motion made by Director Wayne and second by Director Giese. Please pull the board. Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Warren,
Yes.
Director Fernandez,
Yes.
Director Giese,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crum,
Yes.
Director LaChance,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Boyd,
Yes.
Director Wooten,
Yes.
Director Enbro,
Yes.
Director Reed,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Motion carries. Agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action on renewal Microsoft Enterprise Agreement by Luke Collins, Information Cyber Technology Manager.
All right, time to get technical. Some really exciting information technology information that I'm going to throw your guys' way. So basically, to be discussing the renewal of the enterprise agreement. What the enterprise agreement is, 3 years ago, we addressed the board to ask for $750,000 for this enterprise agreement. It lasts 3 years. We've had one for 12 years now. Microsoft has you renew it every 3 years. That's just their process to have this. It covers every single Microsoft product that we have. And I'm going to go over some of those further. Part of also what we're going to talk about is what we're adding to this. And not only what we're adding, but what we're going to be doing with our systems. So here's a little bit of what we have on this agreement. Our entire email system, all of our email system is on this agreement, so everybody's email. All of our Windows Server licenses are on here. Microsoft is a very complicated and complex and very convoluted licensing program. So you have to license every single server, every single person that connects to that server, every person that uses a database. So our databases are covered under here. Some of our Microsoft products like Dynamics CRM, which is a product that we use for project management, and some of the GCR stuff, they all use it. Also, Microsoft Project, Visio, SharePoint Online is a big one. We're actually migrating our entire file server. So we're no longer going to have on-site file sharing. It's going to be hosted by Microsoft, and that comes with this as well. Also, we get the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center. This is huge. This has a lot of cybersecurity tools, a lot of phishing tools, it also includes our discovery tool. Before we were using a different system, we had to go outside that. Now Microsoft can perform that for us. Also covers all of our Office suite, so Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Word, all of that stuff is included on here for every single employee at the BRA. It also covers our Windows Workstation licenses. So you have to have a license for every single computer and laptop that we do business on, that we perform work at the BRA. So everybody has to have one of those licenses. This also includes Teams messaging, which is our communication. That's how we communicate on a regular basis on a chat app. It also is our phone system, and that was actually added in 2020. So we actually migrated. We had a separate phone system, but that was migrated to this as well. So we have added an entire phone system. Other things that are on there is personal storage space like OneDrive. We also have some further cybersecurity tools that come with it, like Microsoft App Security, which provides very, very in-depth auditing and cybersecurity tools. What we're going to be adding to this in 2022 is Azure hosting services. And I'm going to kind of get more into that here. But first, I want to talk about the benefits of what we've had by moving to the Microsoft 365 platform. Essentially, we had on-site email, on-site services, and we migrated everybody 3 years ago to this system. We've been able to take our availability and efficiency, which means our uptime, time that our systems were working, and how efficiently they're working, from 95% to 99.99% uptime. That was huge. Previously, we had times where we had email out for 3 or 4 days at a time. No longer do we have those problems. Data loss, prevention, and integrity. We've been able to save so many different items of data from being lost with backups, with redundancies, and also it prevents any type of personal information getting sent out of the BRA without being audited, like social security numbers and stuff like that. We can now keep track of that stuff using this system. And our cybersecurity tools that we get with this are phenomenal. We approximate that at least 10 advanced incidents get prevented a week as a result of moving to Microsoft 365. Another benefit we get is streamlined business processes. This integrates with basically every tool that we use at the BRA that's not Microsoft. It has all of our tools are integrated with Microsoft to make it a streamlined process. It makes it easier for our users, makes it easier for us to support. And also, it's more cost efficient. Doesn't seem like it when you're looking at it, and we're asking for not to exceed $1 million, but I promise you it is much more cost efficient, and I'm going to get down to that here. So part of what we had to do for this, since it's a 3-year term, we had to really look back and decide, what are we going to do as an IT department? What are we going to do for the BRA to really have the most efficient, the most robust, and the most secure system moving forward? So first what we had to do was look back. We had to look back at what we had. We took an in-depth inventory of all of our servers, all of our databases, all of our software, and our computers. We went through tons of documentation. We did put eyes on physical servers. We have what's called virtual infrastructure. We did inventory of those as well. We took a huge re-examination of how we did on-premises hosting. So the difference between on-premises is we actually have a data center here located in this building. It's a room with a bunch of servers that run in it, and we house all of our data there. We really looked at the cost of that, the manpower that it takes to run that, and some of the downside of keeping it here as opposed to using Microsoft to host some of that for us. We also went through and redid all of our licensing. We went through every single server, every single computer, did all of our user accounts, and we made sure that we were using the right license. And we consulted with Microsoft, we consulted with third-party vendors to make sure we were compliant. Because what will happen, and I've seen this before, is Microsoft will come in and they'll send auditors your way, kind of like the IRS. So if you don't have the right licensing, they will literally, it's called a SAM audit. And you don't want to go through one of those. I've been through 2 of them myself, and they're very, very painful. They will hire another company of auditors, literally, to go through your entire systems, and it takes up time, costs money, and it's just something that we really, really want to avoid. So that's why we were very, very diligent on finding out exactly where we needed to license our systems. We also looked at utilization. What are we actually using here? Are we really pushing what the infrastructure is that we have? And we also went through and made sure that we allocated for each user that's using each system. Because while we have over 250 employees here at the BRA, not everybody uses every system. So we have to really understand who is using what system and what is going to benefit those users and what is going to benefit the BRA as a whole, as well as different departments. And part of that is predicting growth. We have a lot of change. We have a lot of growth going on. And we have to really be in a place where we can expand quickly in the right way and securely. So we took that into consideration. Also, technological improvements. I don't have to explain to you, I think you guys know, technology is moving rapidly, and when you have on-premise hosting, it's hard to keep up. And also, I went through 5 to 10 years of replacement costs, support contracts to find out, really, what are we spending to host on-site? And here's kind of a cost breakdown of what we spend on a yearly basis. Essentially, we spend up to $325,000 conservatively a year hosting our services on premises. That includes the data center that we have here. We also have a disaster recovery site that is included in these costs. Why is this so expensive? Well, we have to buy servers, we have to buy networking equipment, we have to buy licenses, we have to buy infrastructure to back those up. We also have to pay for support for these. These are really, really complicated systems that we house here, and if something breaks, we need somebody to be there within 4 to 6 hours to replace it. There's also some miscellaneous costs that go in there, and also hardware failure costs. This $25,000 I have here allocated for that is actually a very conservative estimate, because sometimes it can cost a lot more when we have just a sudden hardware failure. That's outside of one of our support or warranty contracts. We cannot eliminate all of our on-site hosting. There's a lot of systems that have to run here that integrate with cloud stuff. Our SCADA system has to stay here. There's a lot of stuff that we don't really want to be in the cloud, not because it's less secure, but we have to have it for either compliance or regulation, stuff like that. It just has to be here, and it works better if it's here. But we can significantly reduce what we are hosting here. We estimate that we can reduce up to 65 to 80% of all resources, and those can be migrated. Something else that I didn't really touch on is the time to support this infrastructure. We have employees that are dedicated to supporting these, and they are overextended. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But anytime a server dies or a hard drive failure, that takes systems down. That's a big cost not only to the IT department, but the BRA as a whole. And it's a huge risk. Availability is very important at the BRA. We have very critical systems that have to stay online 24/7. And it's very difficult when you're hosting at an office building with a limited IT staff to be able to pull that off. You're vulnerable to outages, hardware failures, weather events, security events, and system replacements. We're all familiar with the supply chain problems we're having right now. That's been exacerbated, and sometimes it takes months to get replacement costs, and so we would have to limp along until we can get that. And so we can eliminate that by moving to the cloud. Here are some of the benefits of what we would experience. We can reduce on-site hosting costs by up to 75%. Availability, we can increase that to 99.9%. That is about as good as you can get when it comes to hosting services. Also, something that's very important is we need to be scalable. We need to be able to move to increase and reduce when we can. When we have on-site servers, we cannot do that. We are stuck with what we have. If we use cloud hosting services, we'll be able to scale at a robust, quick way in real time. We can now be proactive versus reactive. A lot of what we do is reactive because we have so much work in supporting the on-site servers. So we really want to be proactive and looking to the future and not to the past or to the present. Also, increased security. Physical security is going to be increased because you don't have that physical access to the system anymore. It's moved to the cloud. But also, we get a new host of tools and auditing that we can use to further secure our environment. Geographic redundancy is huge. During the February freeze, if we had had our email system hosted here, we would have been down for 4 days. Our disaster recovery site, unfortunately, also froze. So we need to be able to fail over in the event that there is anything like this. So we need geographic redundancy, something that's completely in a different environment, that if there's any kind of hurricane, freeze, or any kind of weather event, or any other thing, a tornado outside of normal range, we need to be able to fail over to that. So that is a huge benefit to the BRA. We also get access to modern technology, stuff that's way more efficient. And I've been working with our programming department on some of our programs that are developed in-house, and they are going to fly on Azure infrastructure. Whether it's hard drive technology, storage technology, RAM, CPU, all that stuff, it's just more efficient in the cloud than it is here. Because essentially you buy servers and you have to replace them every 3 to 5 years, and so you have 3 or 5 year old technology running your systems. Also gives us flexibility. We can change course quickly and fast. We're not stuck when we move to the cloud. So those are some of the benefits. Here's a breakdown of what we're looking at and why we're seeing a rise in this. Because previously we asked for $750,000. And here's kind of a breakdown. You can see that $158,000 is in the Microsoft 365, and that's some of the stuff that I talked about before, which is all of our Office licenses, all of our email system, SharePoint Online, all that stuff is included in that cost. So that's why that's so high. The other items on there are the server licensing. Some of our other apps that we use with Microsoft are on here as well. We have estimated that it'll cost up to $75,000 a year to move to Microsoft Azure. That's that blue pie slice right there. We cannot come up with a exact number for Microsoft Azure hosting because of it's more of an estimate. And even Microsoft Azure gives you a calculator that you're going to get an estimated cost. And so what we use is we use this tool that Microsoft installs in our systems and runs for several months and tells you this is what it's going to estimate. This is the estimate of cost that's going to cost you on a yearly basis. So this is a per year breakdown, not a 3-year breakdown. So what we're looking at is $982,000 over 3 years is our estimate. That's a conservative estimate. It might be less than that, but we want to be sure that we have the funds to make this less than $1 million over the next 3 years. Once everything is migrated, we can estimate that we can save up to $600,000 over 3 years to the BRA. So once we move to this system and we can start reducing our on-site hosting infrastructure, this is what we can look to save in the future. Now, this is not going to be an immediate savings because it's going to be a gradual process as we migrate, but this is what I just kind of wanted to put a figure of what it could be like once we do migrate. So the reasons for the price increase is Microsoft loves to increase their prices every 3 years. We have no control over that. They are a business, they have to make their money. So
They do.
we have to allocate for that. Company growth, we've added users, we've added products, so that's another reason. We had a temporary license increase that will actually be reduced on a future contract as we migrate. Because essentially when you migrate, you have to have overlap between the servers that are here and the servers that are there. It's a very small price increase. I mean, you're looking at like maybe $5,000 every year. We also added services, the cloud hosting services that I was talking about. Also, we added our entire phone system to this over the last 3 years, so that's why you're seeing that price increase. And the Azure hosting, as I said, is based on approximation. So, yes.
I'm not a techie guy like you, but I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Talk about when the freeze hit. I assume y'all have generators here, correct?
Yes,
that
sir.
kick on when something goes out?
Yes,
Okay.
and we had a few problems with, like a few other people did, with those generators actually freezing up.
Really?
So that didn't necessarily happen at some of our other locations, and we did have some redundancy. We were able to get those online eventually,
Okay.
but we definitely ran into some problems.
The other second question I have is, Microsoft's notorious for releasing software with 10,000 bugs in them, there's always something wrong. How do you know that this Azure is going to work like they claim it's going to work? Have you looked at alternative companies? My problem, I always try to play devil's advocate,
Sure.
and I have a problem giving all of your business to one company. Like you said, they hold you hostage and they come in here like the Gestapo and start pouring through everything like the IRS does, and you're guilty until you're proven innocent. That's my only concern. I know Microsoft comes up with all this stuff, but have you looked at alternative companies?
Yes, we looked into AWS is the biggest player in the cloud hosting market. Their costs were going to be a little bit more than us just because of the Microsoft licensing and the Microsoft, essentially, you almost get a discount by using Microsoft products and Microsoft hosting. The other thing is, we also looked at Google was another big player in the cloud hosting. The other thing is we have backups that actually back up to AWS. So we're going to continue to do that. So as say Microsoft shuts down and we have all our eggs in one basket, we'll be able to set up an environment in AWS and allocate for that. So we do have a plan to not keep all of our eggs in one basket in that item. But I totally agree. Yes, sir.
So, Luke, it looks like we're really kind of making a bigger commitment, when we take it off-site and the savings. And so with the inflation rates and everything, could we do a longer-term agreement, and try to, as the hedge against inflation, and try to protect ourselves and say, hey, we're really getting in bed with you guys, and try to get a better longer-term deal?
No, I totally understand that. Yet, no, Microsoft does 3-year terms. That's how they've always done it. In fact, the licensing model, they stick you with this thing called software assurance. It only lasts so long, and so that's why they do it every 3 years. They allocate.
I know. I 365 myself. It is a big commitment. We're all in. And then you're really dependent on them. So it just seemed like make it look more like a partnership than a holdup.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Director.
We should already have Teams, right? I mean, we got the phone system.
Yes. So actually, in 2020, so Teams comes with Microsoft Office, the chat app, but the actual phone system, which is which comes with your actually voice over IP system, that's another service that you have to add. And so we actually migrated that to.
Well, you have to add if you want to dial outside.
Yes, sir.
But, and you're already going to have SharePoint through Teams, sort of. You already got that. Have you considered looking at one of the partners? Sometimes they get a little more flexibility if you go through the partners on pricing. Maybe getting a few little adders, value adders.
Yes, actually, we are.
Cybersecurity action,
We are using a partner to.
Oh, you are? Okay, good.
For agreement, yes. Microsoft actually won't even let you sign it directly with them. You have to go through a third-party seller.
Right.
And we actually evaluated several, and this was the lowest cost.
Good. And as far as your employee experience and your training and so forth, what are we doing now? And is there any thought process towards Viva or something like that?
Yes. So are you talking about using Microsoft for training?
Yeah, using Viva or something to manage your training, or?
We haven't looked at that necessarily yet, but it's something we could look at down the road.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Great presentation. Quick question regarding the migration process. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of the time and what actually goes into getting all of that data migrated into the cloud, and who's doing that work? Is it your staff, or is that Microsoft, or is that a joint?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So our team is going to handle the migration. Microsoft essentially just gives you a platform and access. And actually, we already have access to it now. It's just, and you can choose to set up. So if you, what we call, our servers are virtual. So we call them VMs, virtual machine, right? And so most of our stuff is hosted like that, so it can be very easily migrated. And Microsoft has a migration tool where you can actually replicate that entire VM in real time. And once it's replicated, and you keep them, and you can actually turn up the other one simultaneously, test it, and then turn the system off here. So that's kind of, it makes for a really seamless move. And you know, that's going to be up to a year to start migrating all this stuff. First, we have to get ourselves into this agreement, and then we have to kind of allocate for some of the contracts that we have locally with our existing infrastructure, so they're not overpaying. And so it's going to be kind of like a stair step, a gradual as we move. So we actually have some flexibility to do that. But yeah, our staff is going to do the actual migration, and Microsoft is just going to be there to, you know, let us set it up. So they won't actually get into any of our systems or log into anything. It'll just be solely our IT staff.
So it sounds like this is a 3-year agreement. By the time you get everything in place, you're really going to be 2 years in.
Yes, sir. Yes. I think she raised her hand first. Yes.
Yes. Sorry. I appreciate all of the data. My question's a little bit more about liability. So with this whole package, is there any liability coverage for any data breach for personal identifiable information?
So that depends. If it's if Microsoft deems it to be part of their breach, then the liability is on them. But if it's a vulnerability that's found in our systems that we didn't allocate for, then that would follow under us. But we have insurance and stuff for that type of stuff. But for the most part, it's under Microsoft. If it's part of the Microsoft platform that's breached. Yes, sir.
Out of curiosity, who does the Lower Colorado River?
Who they use? What kind of systems are they using?
They're using Microsoft 365
Same
as well.
thing?
I'm not sure who they're using for cloud hosting. I think they use multiple vendors. The last time I had a conversation with them. But I'd be happy to find out more.
No, I
information.
don't.
Director
Yes, sir.
Lattimore has a question.
My experience with Microsoft has not been particularly good. What I'm concerned about, we launch off into this and we get to the end of the 3-year program. How much risk are we facing if Microsoft, let me show my ignorance. My experience with them has been that they have a bad habit of pulling the plug and canceling their support at some point as you're going forward. Say we engage in this project and we get down to the end of the 3 years, then are they going to continue? Are they likely to abandon the project and go off and do something else? What's our follow-on plan?
Yes, and that is always a risk. Luckily, these types of Microsoft products are the ones that they've invested most of their money in. So I kind of follow where they're headed as a company, and this is pretty much where they are. This also allocates for all their changes. So when you're on this platform, any new product, we automatically get updated to that new product with this. And so we're not on the old infrastructure. A lot of those problems that you see with Microsoft is older organizations that are using older infrastructure that are using on-site services that can't update. And so they run out of support and they're forced to change. That's also why we are, when it comes to the cloud hosting piece of this, which is the main thing that we're adding, we are going to have a backup that actually sends it to Amazon workstations or workspaces, which is another cloud provider. In the event that something happens to Microsoft, Microsoft's like, we're not hosting anymore, we'll be able to migrate that to there, and it'll be in-house in their system as well.
So I think you've answered the question. So our data is always going to be accessible to us. We would be able to go and retrieve it,
Yes,
no
sir.
matter what Microsoft does.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we'll have it. We're not putting all of our data in one basket. We're keeping it. And by the way, when we send it to Amazon, it gets encrypted 3 times, and it also becomes immutable, meaning it cannot change. That data cannot change unless you have the encryption key, which is not stored anywhere in AWS. So.
Director LaChance has a question.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
Luke, thanks for the presentation. Not to drag this on, I have a few quick questions and comments on the timeline for Azure. I think I would challenge your team, if we're handling all this internally, to create a good timeline on data cleansing, data migration, departments, priorities, things like that, just to help this timeline of the 3 years and to get as much moved and the right data to the cloud, if you will. And then the next point on SharePoint, I wasn't real clear. Are we currently using SharePoint internally? Or is this an intention that we will use?
What was that last question?
So are you currently using the SharePoint platform?
Yes.
Yes, you are. And does each department set up their internal security on who has access to?
Yes. So as far as like privilege access management, when our programming department mainly handles that for each department. They give us, so essentially we want to limit who has control. Now, whenever somebody sets up a SharePoint site for their department,
Right.
we usually we designate one person to have administrative rights or
That was my question.
change rights to just that site.
Okay.
And that site only, so they can handle their data, which is pretty typical. But for the most part, any major changes stays with the administrative rights, stay within the IT department.
Yep, thank you.
Director Fernandez has a question.
Yes, sir.
Luke, thank you. Great presentation, and this is the direction things are going for organizations like the BRA. And this might be more of a David Thompson question, but we have quite an investment in on-site hardware. Have we done an analysis on how much essentially that we're going to be writing off? How much have we invested in our on-site stuff that we're just going to cast aside in this move to the cloud?
So actually, I can actually answer that question. So luckily, most of our infrastructure, I would say 80% is coming up for replacement.
Okay.
So I make sure that when we evaluated, part of our audit was finding out, hey, did we just buy a new system and are we going to waste our money? I wanted to eliminate that.
Okay.
And the stuff that is not coming up for replacement, we're going to continue to use because we still have to have a certain percentage of our stuff on site. So we're going to need on-site services. So we're going to use that infrastructure. We're going to make sure the newest that we have that's not up for replacement that we'll use for that.
Okay.
So
Very good. Thank you.
Luke, I have a question.
yes, ma'am.
How many people are on your team?
We have 13 people total in the IT department. It's 12 now, but we're actually open. We're looking for a replacement for one of our network admins who recently left us.
Okay, and then the second question, as we get closer to the 3-year mark, we'll be adding staff with the expansion and the growth of Allen's Creek. How many licenses are part of this package that you've included, and for how many people, and did you anticipate that growth for them?
Yes, all of the licensing. So essentially, we have about a 20 to 30 person buffer for the Microsoft licensing, but we also allocate an extra. So every year, Microsoft does this thing called a true up, and so they say, "Have you added any users?" And while we do have that buffer, and we very rarely tell them, "No, we haven't added any people," we have enough licenses for those. We can still add those every year, and as they come on. And it's not going to be a very large cost to add, up to 30 users, but we usually keep a 20, 25 person buffer. When it comes to all the licensing, we keep more like a 50 to 100 person buffer, just in the event that down the line we have a huge influx of people. But what the good news about this agreement is it will allow us to flexibly move up and down within that range of cost. So it wouldn't be like a huge cost if we had all of a sudden 100 new employees.
So that's a lot of people. Do we anticipate that many people between now and the end of the 3-year contract? Then do
probably
we
not.
need to be paying for that many?
No, for the 20 people, that's pretty standard. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a significant cost to us to have that because we have people that come and go. And so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to see 20 new employees within the next 3 years. Because we have to take into account all of our sites as well. So even if we have a maintenance worker that's starting out at Possum Kingdom, we still need to allocate them an email account.
Sure.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions. Please read the resolution.
Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager CEO to execute a contract with Microsoft for a software enterprise agreement having a term of 3 years and a not-to-exceed cost of $1 million.
A motion was made by Director Savage, a second by Director LaChance. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Boren,
Yes.
Director Fernandez,
Yes.
Director Geezy,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crone,
Yes.
Director LaChance,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Emro,
Yes.
Director Reese,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Motion carried. Agenda number 5, report and possible discussion on strategic plan workshop by John King, Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives Manager. John.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Today, we want to take an opportunity, as we did last year, to talk to you about our FY22 plan. And all this is in preparation for the FY23 plan, which we'll present at the July board meeting. So in your packet, you should have received a clean copy of the FY22 plan, as well as a copy of our internal tracking log that we've initiated. So today's discussion is really geared more around looking at the contents of the FY22 plan and talking through any comments or feedback you may have on that. We will, at the end of this fiscal year, provide a status report for the FY22 plan, all the strategies and initiatives. That's something I mentioned in the last strategic plan update presentation. So again, today really just focused on contents versus status update. To start with, as you're all very well aware, our mission statements, we exist to develop, manage, and protect the water resources of the Brazos River Basin. Nothing new around the ordinary. This is just a graphical layout of the high-level plan, and we'll use this kind of as a springboard as we go through. We'll have a slide that'll have the different objectives and strategies, but please engage as we go through, and if you have questions, let's stop, wherever they may be. But guiding principles. Number 1 is quality people, the right people for the right job. Number 2 on our guiding principles is integrity and respect. 3, commitment to service and stewardship. And finally, innovation and continuous improvement. So if you look at our 6 goals that are really the meat and potatoes of our plan, number 1 is developing resources. Certainly we take that serious and we've seen a lot of activity on that as of lately. Goal 2 is to manage the resources that we're entrusted with, make sure we're using those for the beneficial use of our citizens. 3 would be the protection and, when possible, improvement of the quality of our resource. 4 has to do with effective planning and really being strategic and forward thinking. Number 5 would be our communications and public relations goal. And finally, number 6 has to do with the development and retention of quality employees. And underneath that, you'll see that's just a placeholder for all the different objectives and strategies that we'll go through on the next several pages. So before we jump into those, any high-level comments on anything listed on the slide here or feedback as you've reviewed it? All right. So on this slide, you'll see these are all of the objectives and strategies we have to support goal number 1. And they range everything from, Allen's Creek, we're certainly excited about getting that one going, but aquifer storage and recovery, pipeline, transferring water, conveyance of water. So I'll give you just a moment to absorb that one, and then let me know if there's any feedback on this one, and we'll move on. Another note is that the numbers on these slides correspond to the tracking log that was included in your packet. So if you have any comments on those, we can move it that way. So from there, we move into goal 2, and these are objectives and strategies to help us support managing the water resources. Give you just a moment there. The next slide is a continuation of that.
Can I get back on the?
I sure can.
The Water Master Program. So we're heading into this drought. Any update on? So they get more involved or engaged and can dictate some things to us in these drought conditions. Is that correct? Yeah.
I'll let Aaron talk to that for just a moment, Jared.
Yeah, I guess the update that was provided, I guess, on Friday, conditions in the lower basin as far as stream flow have declined, and from time to time, the Water Master does require us and other reservoir owners to pass inflows downstream to those senior water rights. And we did initiate a release on Friday. Luckily, we did get some rain in the central part of the basin, so about an hour ago or so, we were able to discontinue that release. But as we go forward, we definitely coordinate on a day-to-day basis with Molly, the Water Master, on conditions and managing the system. So hopefully we'll get some good rain this week. And
talk about your Wednesday morning phone calls.
Yeah.
And talk about those customers.
So most every Wednesday or every other Wednesday, we coordinate and have a call with Molly, the Water Master, and our 3 large lower basin customers, NRG, Gulf Coast Water Authority, and Dow Chemical. And as conditions get drier, those discussions happen more frequently. Last week we met 2 times we met, and as conditions get changed, those discussions obviously happen more frequently. And so that's kind of how we've been doing this program as far as meeting every other week, and then more frequently, as conditions change, for the last several years, and those have really been helpful in both our customers and their operations, and then obviously the interaction between BRA and the Water Master. Just a really good format to make sure everybody's on the same page in managing the river.
Thank you.
Any other questions, recommendations before we move on? Again, additional objectives here, and you can see them listed out. It has a lot to do with our treatment facilities, looking for new opportunities there. Got some items associated with security analysis up at the top. From there, we move to goal number 3, and that has to do with protecting the water resources and, where possible, improving the quality and habitat, and also supporting responsible and efficient use of our natural resources. So we have those objectives laid out here. Any questions or recommendations on this one? Additional related to goal number 3.
On Stillhouse Hollow, are they addressing the hydrilla? I guess that's what it is, that grass issue on Stillhouse Hollow?
No, it's something that's looked at from time to time by Parks and Wildlife. And until it becomes an issue where it's impacting different intakes and their ability to pump water out of the reservoir, which in the last few years hasn't been, then it won't be an issue that will be addressed. It's pretty expensive to get the herbicide and try, to kill as much of it would need to be killed. So, and it's also considered habitat for animals also, so.
Okay.
But not at this point in time.
Okay.
Moving to goal number 4, this has to do with strategic planning and effective resource planning. A lot of work and time goes into this with our integrated water resource planning, the regional water planning efforts, just overall internal efficiency improvements there.
John, talk a little bit while they look at this slide about the quarterly meetings that you host to go through these objectives and strategies and how they line up with our budget process.
Absolutely. We started this year of getting a quarterly internal review, and it consists of our management team where we sit down and work through each of these initiatives and strategies to get kind of a self-check, a status update on where we are, talk about any obstacles that can be foreseen, and try to be just, I guess, a little more agile in how we're responding to opportunities that come up. So we take that data and we're going to compile it, and that'll be a lot of what is reported to you at the end of the fiscal year whenever we do our annual report, and it'll have more detail about each of these and the status and the accomplishments for the year. And we also do that, as David said, as kind of a precursor and to help us know for our budget preparation needs. If we see something that we're spending a lot of time on or something that has become a hot topic type thing, we know that we probably need to look a little closer at it for the budget planning for the upcoming fiscal year. So a lot of activity along with that, and a lot of documentation we're building on the back end to support that, which I think you'll find very informative as we move forward. Any comments on this one? Yes.
Saw something on one of the slides that just caught my attention and need to ask about it. It was a snake study. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? What is that?
Something about snakes.
Sorry about that.
Go back a slide. There you go. No, go back a slide.
There
you go.
is a water snake that is endemic to the upper basin, pretty much from Lake Whitney to about the Clear Fork of the Brazos River, and that's the only place in the state or the nation that it lives. It is semi-aquatic. It lives in the riffles and feeds off fish and in the rocky shoreline, so it's something that I am concerned is our next potential vulnerability for federal interaction. It's been on the state endangered list for 20 plus years with very little work. So I'm hoping at some point to do some work to gather research, because very little is known about the snake's life history and what it actually needs. As usual with everything aquatic, the very first thing that a lot of the environmental action groups are pointing to is reservoirs are the source of the problem. So it's a study out there to begin to fill some of the holes to understand better what the snake's needs. Hopefully, I've never been hurt by not having data or having too much data, but I have been hurt by not having data. So we're hoping to eventually gather data to be able to defend ourselves if it should ever come up for federal attention.
Thank you. That was fascinating.
So where we are in place and time with that, we talked a little bit with the board meetings ago about spending some money to follow in a similar set of footsteps that we did with the 3.2.4.1 freshwater mussels, and trying to understand the consequences of the snake being listed as endangered, and would U.S. Fish and Wildlife come to BRA and say, okay, here's the water that you're going to have to be releasing now. So we're scratching our head with the price of that, doing that work, and understand the urgency or lack thereof of doing that work. Since we visited with the board last time, the Comptroller's Office has reached out to us completely on their own and has indicated to us that they're going to start doing some of the research work for the water snake. And so what we're trying to do right now is get our hands around what the comptroller is going to do, how much money they're going to spend, what their focus is going to look like. The same with Texas Parks and Wildlife, so we can go back and adjust our numbers and our efforts so that we're not duplicating effort. The three of us are working hand in hand to try to collect the right data that needs to be collected and move any water snake studies and efforts forward in that fashion. So the comptroller is concerned about it from the perspective of U.S. Fish and Wildlife coming in, taking water away from the state of Texas, and that taking economic opportunity away from the state of Texas. So that's why they get involved.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you taking a little time.
Absolutely. Good question.
Can you go back to that one slide?
That one. Yes.
I had a question. We just approved a moment ago, or a few moments ago, this movement on the upgrade, and yet you're talking about implementation of Microsoft 365.
That was my,
Is that your, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, ask.
Are you going to upgrade that 4.3.2 in light of what we just approved?
The FY23 plan, I'll consider it a transitional plan for us. We'll change what needs to be changing, but the ultimate goal in FY24 is to come back for that 3 to 5 year approval that we talked about in the last board meeting. So you're correct. Some of these will need to be updated, and you'll see that in the draft plan that we'll present and for your approval at the July board meeting.
Thank you.
So when you say on the 4.3.2 that you're going to implement 365 to ensure high availability of data and facilitate, give me an example of how, once you start using Microsoft 365, is going to facilitate archiving and searching for your data.
Sure. Let me get Luke back up here. He should be able to-
What's the
Just the person
question?
you wanted to see again.
Let him do that.
Oh,
Yeah, so the question you particularly had was about the archiving and searching. So part of what we did with Microsoft 365 migration is we actually took our e-discovery tool, which we use for searching emails, searching data, and archiving old data. So we have, the lawyers also probably would be able to answer this question, but we have certain retention compliance we have to follow. We also have open records requests that we have to follow. And so the attorneys use that platform for searching through all of our information and archiving old data and following certain retention plans. So that's part of what that's covering right there.
And your backup is going to be totally, on this one, totally cloud-based. No hard drives of anything anymore.
Yes, so we actually, right now, we actually back up our cloud data on site and then we move it back to another cloud. So it's actually sitting in 3 different places. We are going to keep some type of archive in place here for larger documents that will also have what's called cold storage backups. That's part of a plan down the road. That's not necessarily referenced in this item though, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Any more questions on this slide? Comments? All right. Goal number 5 has to do with how we maintain communications and public relations, and just to help support our mission and how we get our statement out there. And we have just a myriad of things that we do for that. The brown bags that we'll be having next week, our social media programs, very proactive in those approaches. Any comments or questions on this one? Continuation of Goal 5 has to do more with our finance side and maintaining transparency there. Again, you'll see the FY23 draft. We may combine some things, shorten some things, and change it up a little bit, so you'll see that in red line form. And then goal number 6 has to do with our employee retention and development and the multiple programs and benefits that we enjoy as employees. I feel we have a very competitive employment package that we're able to offer people, and we've been able to really develop and retain some quality employees in the BRA that are going to help us do all these big projects that we need to complete.
John, I want to comment.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for bringing this to us, continue educating the board. I'm always very interested on retaining employees and making sure that we're keeping them educated but more importantly, takes a lot of time and money to get the right people in place. And I know that over the last 6 or so years, I know we've been working towards making sure that the BRA is just not the stepping stone to get somebody trained and then they run off to some other place. So I appreciate, and I would really like to challenge David and all the leadership team as to, how creative are you being with retention of employees? Because right now it's really hard, and y'all have a very specific task at hand. So,
Very good point. Thank you. So where we go from here is if after the meeting you think of any comments, please send them, and we'll look at those, incorporate those into our preparation for the FY23 plan. In June, we will post our draft FY23 plan for public comment on the website. That's something we did last year and received some comments on, so we want to reduplicate that and get that out there. And then, again, like I said before, in the July board meeting, we'll bring it back, let you look at it, and if everyone's in agreement, approve it for the next 1 year period. Any final thoughts or questions or comments?
Good job.
All right, like I said, if you think of anything after the fact, please feel free to send it our way. Thank you.
thank you. That was a great discussion, guys. Okay, agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action on interim operations assistance for City of Pearland wastewater treatment by Brad Brunette, Central and Lower Basin Regional Manager. Brad.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is an action item. We're seeking approval for the GM CEO to enter a temporary wastewater treatment operations agreement with the City of Pearland. This is a map that just shows the location of the City of Pearland. It's just south of Houston there, and you can see that it's about 15 miles east of Sugar Land, where we currently operate 4 wastewater plants. Those are the red dots there, 1 through 4, and it's about 50 miles north of our Clute-Richwood wastewater treatment operation. So just give you some geographical perspective of where we're talking about. The city reached out to us about 2 weeks ago based on a recommendation by the City of Sugar Land. Pearland has 5 wastewater plants that range from about 1 to 6 million gallons per day in size. They recently discovered some pretty significant operations and management issues that they were having operating and running those plants, and they really needed some immediate assistance. And so, again, they called Sugar Land, and Sugar Land gave them our contact information, and they ended up calling us. So we've had several calls with the City of Pearland over the last couple of weeks, and our operations staff have actually been down there as early as, not last Thursday, but the Thursday before last, I think, was the first time our folks went down there. Spent some time down there Thursday and Friday, and then we've been providing some assistance to the city all last week. They're looking for temporary operations oversight, including review of some of their data, review of their standard operating procedures, feedback and recommendations from us on some of their equipment, and also just kind of daily oversight and direction for their staff that they still have there. They're going to continue to provide for the day-to-day operations of the facilities, as well as staffing and staffing for after-hours emergencies and things like that. But again, they're needing some direction and some management oversight for this interim period. We've estimated, based on what we've understand in talking with them, that it's going to take probably about 4 man-hours per day for us to help them. Most of that's going to come from our superintendents, as well as the chief operator that we have at Sugar Land and our chief operator down at Clute. We're going to try to kind of share duties among those folks so that we don't neglect our other operations that we have, but that we can help the city as best we can. We've developed an interim operations agreement with the city that the city's agreed to. It has a term of 4 months. That can be extended by agreement of both parties. It also has a provision in there where it can be terminated with 5 days notice from either party. If we get into a situation where, whatever the case may be and things weren't working out. We're going to recover all of our labor and travel costs, obviously, associated with our operations down there. And we'll also be adding on a 5% management fee to all the invoices that we send to the city. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Again, it's an interim thing, probably 4 to 6 months is kind of what the city has thought in talking with us, but again, we feel like we can help them. They were recommended by one of our customers, and so we're going to do our best to do that if you guys approve. I've got a resolution for you.
Question by Director Savage.
So, we just talked about retention and keeping our people, and this just looks like a great opportunity for them to maybe shop some of our superintendents and come over there, and it's short term. So,
Yeah.
I don't understand the long-term benefit for us, because, they could just hire our people away. And,
I had that conversation
Yeah.
with our people.
okay. Yeah,
Well, what about with them? Is there gonna be kind of like, hey, we're not gonna be poaching your people type scenario, or in the agreement?
I can't promise you what's going to happen, but again, one of our customers, the people they would be poaching are people that are currently helping the city of Sugar Land, and the city of Sugar Land told them to contact us. They're in a bind, and, we're going to do the best we can to help them. Obviously, again, nobody knows what's going to happen, but I did have a conversation with our guys and said, look, now, we're going to go down there and help them, but you guys can't end up staying down. So we've also talked a little bit with the city about their long-term plans. They're not really set up to outsource, so I don't really think they're looking at this as a test run for BRA, taking over operations like we do down at Sugar Land or some of our other facilities. That's not to say that that's not possible, depending on what they find out over the next few months. But I guess that is a risk. But again, I think we felt it was a situation where it was a risk that we should take to help them.
Do you have an NDA signed with, I know Texas is a reform state, but about what he said, hey, we're gonna send some people over there, but during this amount of time, you're not allowed to approach them about anything? Can something like that be done?
We don't have anything like that in the agreement. I don't know about the legalities of doing something like that.
You can stop somebody from leaving, and if they don't wanna be with you, what do you want?
Director, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask kind of along the same lines. Something in the agreement, when we sign contracts with vendors, there's always a clause in there that, we won't hire away their folks. And, we've never encountered a situation like that, but I feel like there'd be some opportunity for some legal repercussion, financial repercussion on them for us in the event something like that happened.
We can go in and add clauses that they can't hire our folks.
Yeah, make it expensive.
Director Jimenez had a question down there.
It was the same, like a do not compete,
Yeah,
compete clause,
can,
we could do that. And then because of my experience, Sugar Land has quite a bit of money, so.
Sort of like football coaches,
Yeah.
Director Taylor has a question up here.
Brad, maybe I'm being negative on this. I just don't see the upside potential of doing this. I appreciate y'all wanting to help somebody, but this looks like as busy as y'all are, this is taking away from dealing with a customer without a really, and especially at a 5% management fee. At 50% management fee, it might be a little more interesting, but I just don't see this as being something that other than being benevolent, that is benefits to BRA, and that's just my thoughts.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree with him 100%. No good deed goes unpunished, right? And my direct question really is, are we prepared with manpower if it extends the 4-month term that we have outlined here? What is the plan if we need more time to
Well,
do?
Again, at the end of 4 months, if we're still there in 4 months, at the end of that, we could decide whether we're going to continue or not. And we've made it clear to the city, and in the draft agreement that we have provisions in there that basically say our operations take priority over yours. If we get in a bind or whatever at Sugar Land or Clute, we're going to take care of ourselves, and if there's time available, we'll help you. But we do have that in there that we're going to take priority over our operations will take priority over this interim help that we're providing them.
Director Sanderson has a question.
Sugar Land and Pearland over the last probably 10, 15 years have had a pretty good relationship. We got to consider that, hey, one of our good clients has asked us to help out someone, and we want to make sure that Sugar Land understands that, hey, if Pearland steals our people, it could hurt you, or something like that. But, as long as we can manage our risk and then not poaching our folks and make it expensive to take them, they can go where they want to, just making sure that it's expensive to buy them.
Thank you for your comment. Director Henderson has a question.
It's really more of a comment, but, I agree that we need to be friendly to that area of Texas. And so I don't see why helping them out for 4 to 6 months would be a bad thing. I think, as we just need to make sure that we're keeping up the friendly faces and doing what's right for Texas.
Protecting the
Thank you for your comment. Director Savage has a question or comment.
There are other alternatives for them and consultants that can do this kind of work. And so, we have to think about what our mission is. Now, if there's an opportunity for that to turn into a long-term supply like we have, then this is kind of like our business development. But if it's not, I'm with Ford. I don't see why we should do it. That's not in our remit, our goals and that strategy.
And are we locked
Dir-
into the 5%? I mean, can you charge more than that? That doesn't seem very much.
That's consistent with our other cost reimbursable operations. Granted, they're long-term, but we really, don't have anything other than that. So, we felt for 4 months, let's do what we've done with other entities in terms of the standard percentage that we charge.
Director Boren has a question.
I agree with everything everyone said, why, but this is really David's call. It's a management issue that he can deal with, and, I look at it like they're just advising us, and he knows all the gotchas, get yous, and he's been here a long time, so if they feel like it's a good thing, we're not giving direction, just little thoughts, but it's your call. If you think it's a good deal, you'll do it, and if there's a danger, you'll pull. So I just look at it, thank you for the information, let's go,
Thank you for your comment. Director, John Henry Luton here has a question or
Doesn't this
comment.
get back to our mission of protecting the water? It's one of the things we say we're gonna do, so.
Thank you for your comment. Any other questions or comments, concerns? Thank you. Are you through with your presentation? We have a resolution. Please read the resolution.
Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to execute an interim operations agreement to temporarily assist the City of Pearland with operations of its wastewater treatment plants.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Motion made by Director Henderson, second by Director Crone. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
No.
Director Boren,
I was gonna suggest a break.
Director Fernandez,
Yes.
Director Geezy,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crone,
Yes.
Director LaChance,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Embro,
Yes.
Director Reese,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
No?
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Motion carried. At this time, we'll take a 10-minute break. David, sorry. We're back in open session. David, we're going to start with you on agenda item number 7, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2023 proposed annual operating plan by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Okay. David introduced at the beginning that this gives you a first look at what we're planning on doing with the FY23 budget. And ask questions during the presentations, or if you get after the presentation, decide that I have some more questions, we'd be more than happy to get back with David or myself, and we'll answer them. So the first thing I want to do is kind of walk through how I calculated the FY23 rates. And at the top of the numbers is the water supply operating expenses of $52 million. That increase is basically the salaries and benefit increases. We also had some lake operations increases in expenses. The next one is basically the debt subject to coverage. This is the East Williamson County purchase of the water treatment plant there. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, subject to coverage. Debts not subject to coverage are the loans that we have with the Corps of Engineers for the water storage that we have in the 8 Core Lakes in our basin. Now then, you can see that the numbers dropped about $2 million, and that is because of the payoff of the Texas Water Development loan that we just did back on May 2nd. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and how that impacted the rates when I was calculating it. Lastly is the expenses is the operating projects. And these are projects that do not build out major infrastructures. There's studies, there's assessments. So therefore, I include them in the rates themselves. That gives you $61 million in expenses. Excuse me. Revenues, non-system rate. These are like 2-tier. As you know, 2 tiers is we charge one rate for the water being used, and then half of that for the water not being used. And you have utilities in that number too, customers. The other revenues are things like Sugarland is a waste treatment plant that we contract for revenue. East Williamson County, we just talked about. We charge our customers there for the water. We have grants. We have lake permits that we have. We charge in that number. Give me a total of $21 million in revenue. Now then, let's talk about the debt coverage. We're required by the board policies to maintain a 1.3 debt coverage. The bond covenants as well. In East Williams County, debt does require debt coverage as well. You simply take the 0.3 times the 2.5, and that's 761,000. So how much do we need to get from our customers, system rate customers? You basically take the 61, minus out the 21, and add back the 761, giving you 40 million that we need from our system rate holders. You divide that by the 478,000 acre feet, and you get $85. Now, I mentioned before that we just paid off Texas Water Development Board debt of $2 million. That caused the rates to kind of drop down to what I expected we needed to have. $88 is what we've been forecasting to our customers, and as well as I know we go from basically the 83 to 88 is about a 6% increase. But if I did use the 85, that's a much lower percent. I know in FY24, we're going to be needing about $93 an acre foot. And that would be going from 85 to the 93 would be close to 10% increase. So this is helping our customers keep smooth those rates. We're going to be spending a lot of money on capital projects. So therefore, I'm going to be, in July, when I come back to the board, asking for an $88 system rate. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Question?
Total amount of money we'll raise with the $88 rate, how much would that be total?
That is going to be, how much more?
No, I mean, what would okay, so if we're, when you raise it to 88, if you're projecting a $61,000 expense, what kind of money are we looking at $88? Total revenue.
I'm coming up to that as
well.
well.
Next slide.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. That's okay. Let's talk first before we, well, let's see, that is the revenue. Let's go, oops. So let's talk about the revenues then. We're talking about 79.4. We'll be getting 42 million. We would have gotten basically 40 million in using the 85. So that's added another $2 million into the system rate for that. Is that kind of what you're looking for on that? Okay, all right. The other things we have out there is, and we talked about this, the non-system rate, lake operations, which is a pretty small number. East Williams County brings in probably about $6 million. We have Sugarland, 4.2. We have grants, and this is like Brazos G and some of the programs we have there. And then the management fees is basically the 5% that we talked about earlier with cost reimbursables. And then the other costs we have. The other big one we have is basically cost reimbursable customers. And this is like Temple Belton, Clute. This is basically Sandy Creek. And in that, there we, every dollar of cost that we incur, we can bill that back to the customer. And then we do get a management fee of about 5% for that. So this is basically looks at the what we have under contract. It's 718,000 acre feet. We talked about the 478,000 that we have with our system rates. We also have utilities of about 97,000. That's made up primarily of NRG. Two tiers made up of basically two major customers, which is Bell County and Dow. So this is basically looks at the rates increases that we're talking about, going from 83 to 88. We also have the agricultural, which is 70% of the system rate, and we have a few customers there. The two-tier, other fixed price utilities, and the Colorado Basin one, all are calculated based on the contract. The two-tier is one that's calculated off a CPI index that comes out in November that we usually get that in December, and I bring that to the board for increase. The other ones are set by contract, so there's no board approval that I can do with that one. So let's look at the expenses that we have built into the 23 budget. We're looking at an employee cost index increase about 4%. And then about 1% for the merit pool. The 4% is a little higher because of basically the inflation that we're looking at, higher inflation. We're going to be adding 4 full-time positions. And I just want to mention in the O&M expenses that we talked about, the Army Corps of Engineers cost is about $4.6 million for helping to maintain the 8 core lakes. And that equates to about $9 an acre foot. That's in the $88. So let's look at the operating expenses. We already talked a little bit about the 61 million, and that's made up of those 3 numbers there. And then cost reimbursable does match to the revenues we just talked about with 16.5. Operating projects, as we mentioned before, you can see that there's assessments, there's studies, basically anything that we're doing to that doesn't build out to anything that we have in our infrastructure on our basins as well. So let's talk about capital improvements. And that's 49 million. Let's look at the details of this. It's a little easier to see. Again, Allen's Creek, we have paid off Houston, the Texas Water Development Board, so the 20 million we project in FY23 is actually starting that project. The next largest project is we start replacing the Tainer gates at Limestone Lake, and you can see some of the other ones. 2 of them projects out here, which is the phase 3 pumps and the copper ion generators of about 3.2 million, are with Williams County Regional Water Line, and that is a cost reimbursable customer. So therefore, that'll be paid by the customer. So we're actually talking, coming out of our reserves, is 46 million. Now, this is a very busy slide, but I do want to show that over the next 5 years, we do plan to spend about $362 million. So that's another reason why I need to keep the rates on a steady incline, just to maintain, my hope is to maintain things around 6% or less per year. And that, I feel like, will cover the $362 million that we played. I think I've shown the board in one of the other meetings before what our rates would look like out in 2036. So let's take a look at, I've added in here basically the FY22 projections. And I did this, normally I just show you the 23. This basically reflects the capital, in the capital projects, the 67 or 68.8 million that we paid back on May 2nd. And the takeaway here is we had in the FY22 budget ending reserves of about 55, and this shows that we'll have about 53.5. So a little lower than what I projected before. Also in here that we show that we'll be borrowing money in FY23 of about 19 million. Now, I haven't determined yet if that's going to be open market, short term. We also need to work through a little bit more understanding how the forecasts and the cash flows will work for that. If we do borrow the money, it would be probably mid-calendar year '23, and obviously I'll bring that to the board for approval. My goal is to maintain our ending working capitals in the $25 to $30 million each year. You can see we start using rate stabilization reserve, which means we start incurring more. You can see the debt sub coverage increases as we go out, as we borrow more money. Any questions? Oh, there you go. Good. Okay.
David, on that slide where you had that you're projecting 4 new positions, it was a couple of slides back.
Okay, we go back. One more.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Whoop.
Before.
The other way.
Sorry.
Includes adding 4 full-time positions. Are those positions already dedicated, or is that in general, or do they have anything to do with Allen's Creek coming on, or?
No, my understanding are that there are positions that we needed to add on, but not for, so much for Allen's Creek at this time. And I'll let Monica talk to those.
She's on the hot seat.
So we had the 4 new positions. One is for an emergency management coordinator. The other is an inspector at Lake Limestone, a hydrologist, and a cybersecurity specialist. Those are the 4 that we're anticipating adding.
Thank you.
Okay, hold on, we have a lot of questions. I see Director Jimenez, and then we'll come to you, David.
So thank you for the presentation. My question is in your slide for the proposed operating projects.
Okay.
The water snake study, will that be coming off as the Texas State Controller's Office looks into that?
Yeah, some of these are, so basically.
What's the question? We couldn't hear the question up here.
The question is about the water snake study, and will that money be there, or will it be adjusted because of what I said earlier, because of all of the different players? So these are, basically we start our budget process in November, and it's a real cumulative process where we build these budgets over time, and this is really a draft look. So a lot of these numbers may change depending upon our project managers and the timing of the projects and things like that. So certainly the water snake is one of those budgets that we'll be evaluating between now and the time that we go live with our draft budget for our customer meetings, and then when you all see the recommended budget for all of these projects, everything will be scrubbed and updated. So that number very well may be less.
And do keep in mind, these are preliminary numbers, and if they do change, like Dave was saying, in the July when we get ready to adopt it, I'll talk to you a little bit about what has changed in those numbers.
Okay. Before we go to you, Director Les, let's go to Director Savage here.
So on the 5-year plan?
Yes.
So is this what we share with the customers? So, I mean, I think you do a great job of kind of preparing them, and so they're not surprised by, I was just kind of wondering how you cover that in these customer meetings, so.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I give the same kind of presentations, and we did send out customer letters about a week or so ago, and we let them know that the $88 per acre foot would be used is projected for this year. But I do walk through the same numbers and basically talk to them about the capital projects we were planning to do and the money that we're going to be spending on that.
Yeah, I think it's just great. As someone who used to have to sell price increases, it's important that we understand their budgeting cycle so that you can give them a number so they can plan it into their budget. And it sounds like you're working real well with our customers.
And for the last 2 years, I've been giving them $88 for this year.
Okay.
So, and basically for 24, it's basically the same number as well. So I'm trying to keep the same numbers and then making sure, as you'll see in the next slide, there's a huge balancing act that I need to make sure that we have coverage and making sure we don't screw something up against our bondholders as well.
Yeah, I just want to make sure our customers didn't have any big surprise, you know.
You're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Director Leslie has a question.
David, go back one slide if you could. Okay, the Allen's Creek, that's $153,000, not $153 million, is that right?
Those are millions.
That's millions.
Those are millions.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's through fiscal year 27.
Only 27.
It's my understanding that the construction don't begin for 7 or 8 more years, so is that going to be in addition to the 477 million?
No, it's estimate, the project cost that we have now is about 500 million to do Allen's Creek, which includes permitting, design, construction, and that's the last estimate that's been given to us. Now, we'll know, those numbers will be much more refined in 2 years once we get into more of the design and understand more of the lay of the land, but that's based on the Water Development Board and the regional water planning evaluations. Those are the best numbers we have to date.
So you're still saying a total of 500 million?
That's the best number we have today.
Okay, okay.
Director LaChance has a question.
Million.
With an M.
As you go, millions.
Okay.
Director LaChance has a question.
Go ahead.
Can you go back to the capital improvements, the next slide, the 5-year?
Yes.
Kind of a question on how you manage projects by year. As we get closer to maybe Q3 and you're looking at completion, if, let's say for whatever reason, you have projects that won't complete in '22 that are larger projects, will you pull any projects forward? How do you adjust to hit that 79 million in between
As we go through, we do basically quarterly reviews of the projects, and we look at what the projections are for those projects. And then as we get closer and we start building, remember the FY23 budget was built in 8 months. So we look every quarter, and we watch these projects very closely. We encourage the project managers to help us understand how much of this money will be moving from one year to the next. And so we seem to do a pretty good job. If we do make a mistake and don't have enough money in it, I have to come back to the board for it.
Right, I was just curious if you were able to pull anything forward if a project didn't and just kind of move to stay within those annual numbers.
I can pull them forward, but the monies itself, once it's pulled forward, I need to be able to, if we don't use the money, I have to come back to the board.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So I think the question, if I understand correctly, is moving forward, like if it's budgeted in '24, move it to '23 or '22. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so let's say we don't use all 67 million for Allen's Creek in '22, and we're somewhere, I'm just gonna make up a number, 65, is where you project will be. Would you pull some other projects from '23 up? Knowing it, because that 2 million, it'll probably be deferred to '23. I'm asking how do y'all review, and it sounds like you do, that you review the projects to make sure, we don't have a buildup.
Correct. So
I think David answered it.
Yeah, there's a few, he would come for a budget amendment, depending on what type of project it is, whether it's capital or operational. We have the ability to move some funds around. Anything capital, we would have to come to the board for a budget amendment. But as far as if you're looking at it from a
timing
perspective or a resource workload perspective, yes, if things free up and we have the ability to take on new projects. Now, understand most of our projects, they span multiple years, so we don't want to kick a project off and then all of a sudden our workload increases and we got to put that project on hold. So it's a timing, a thought process there to make sure, we have resources funding everything to kick that project.
Thank you.
Director Ambro has a question.
Back on Allen Creek, my understanding is that permitting is going to be in a 5 to 7 year period. So when we're looking at that number, is that all for permitting, $153 million?
No, some of it was the actual pay for Houston and to redo the debt. Most of the 20, the 14, the 6 in the next few years is for permitting and for environmental work and for, we have to be to a certain percentage of our engineering and design before we can submit the permit. So, yeah, a lot of that is for permitting, engineering, and design.
Preliminary engineering.
Correct. Right.
Director Geesey has a question.
So I'm not requesting anything right now, but like if we wanted a drill down of these numbers and we wanted to see what you put together to make up the 67 or the 615, is that available to us?
Absolutely. And what you're going to get in the weeks to come is a book like this with each one of those projects in it, spelled out, and what the project is and what's in those budgets. Absolutely.
Okay.
Get that out after the board has approved it, but but I can provide information, detailed information on each of the projects.
Well, it's in that budget book that you send out before the board meeting. A lot of that is.
So, Director Sanderson has a question.
Yeah. On your CIP plan, it's obviously you're looking at 22 and 23, 24, you got about what, 85, 40, and 30% of that is Allen's Creek, so you don't have a whole lot of room to maneuver outside of that. So that's where it's still going to be, and that's just the way it's going to be. As far as the 22, I guess your burn rate, do you feel like you're on target to kind of stay within where you're planning on being for 22?
Yes. And
Okay.
matter of fact,
No surprises there?
Actually, I didn't have any surprises because basically I had projected Indian working capital to be around 55 and it came in at 53.5.
Okay.
So the projection was very close and I was very pleased with that.
On your computations on your system rates, I noticed on the units, went from 483 to 477 on a previous slide. Could you just illuminate that a little bit? Go back a couple slides.
Okay, sure.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I hope. Huh. There you go. Your top line, 483 versus 477 on your units. Can you just kind of talk to me about the
drop?
Yeah.
Okay, that was Brazos River Electric bankruptcy, and I think we brought that up in the previous meeting. And we do plan to sell it in the FY23, but being conservative, I don't know when that will occur and then how much of that revenue is going to come in for the 23. So I did not put it in the 23 budget.
Right. And so if it did come in for 23, we don't know what it's going to be, but that could be, that's an offset that we're not, that's a plussy.
Sure,
that we're not,
and
okay.
we're going through the process now of we have a lot of people requesting water, so we're going through our questionnaire and our process to determine the best way to sell that water and who needs it the most based on the volumes that we have and the requests that we have. The other thing that he's not showing you in this budget projection is the sale of interruptible water.
Right.
And we usually get a couple of $1 million revenue a year on the sale of interruptible water. But because it is interruptible, we don't use that as a budget projection tool in these numbers.
On the Corps of Engineers and $4.6 million, Gavin, we've gone to them and said, hey, are there any surprises out there, you know?
So the Corps comes in twice a year. Talk about that process, Brett.
We meet with their local Corps of Engineer staff at all the projects 2 times a year, and they review the projects that they have on the books ongoing and also the projects that are coming down the road ahead. And then we also get projections from the Fort Worth District Office. You can argue about how accurate they are. They're usually conservative, so when they tell us what our payments are going to be, most of the time they're that or less. But they do give us like a 5-year outlook every year. So we do have some expectation of what's in the pipe in terms of maintenance. It's usually big dam maintenance projects and things like that that can swing it one way or the other.
Right. Could you just give me a quick breakdown as for what our efforts are as far as grant monies or earmarks to help us out on these projects?
What makes up the
No, what are we doing for grant monies or earmarks to, for example, help out with Allen's Creek and things like that?
You know, we follow along, and, you know, we haven't had any projects as large as Allen's Creek. So we follow along with the ARPA monies and those monies that are given to the state, or we have a federal lobbyist that's following along to make sure to see if there's pots of money that we might be interested in. for a very large project like Allen's Creek, the strings attached to federal money may be something that we would be willing to consider. For much smaller projects, the strings attached to federal monies may not be something that we're interested in. So Director Sanderson, we do follow along, and if the opportunities are right, i.e. some of the Lake Whitney water stuff, then we would try to take advantage of that to save our ratepayers money.
All right, I'd like to make the final comment. Just if you will make sure that that cost of living increase, scrub that number, because in the inflation, gas, a lot of our people live far away from their home bases. So
Okay.
please make sure that, in my opinion, I think we need to make sure that they're really truly getting a cost of living increase. I like the merit portion. I appreciate that. And then cost of goods in general is going up.
Yeah.
So by the time July comes for us to approve this, I know that's just 2 short months away. I know you already built in a buffer, but just make sure that you're coming to us with what we think the projections are with the increase of goods.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to agenda item number 8. Did I already do 8? 9? No, 8. Report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2022, second quarter budget report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
I didn't plan to go ahead and present this because, with the $67.8 million adjustment, this is the second quarter numbers. And so they're not really reflective of what we have. But in the July board meeting, when I do the budget, I will have more details and it gives you some. That's why I gave you the FY22 projections to show you that we're on track for what we had budgeted in the FY22 budget. So unless there's any questions, I didn't plan to go through that, but let me know if anyone wants to go through it.
I don't see any hands up, so we'll move on to agenda number 9, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2022 second quarter investment report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Again, I can quickly go through it, but you're going to see we have 164 million at the end of the second quarter. We don't now anymore, but I put all the money into the money market to make sure that I had plenty to cover the 67.8 million. So basically, that number has dropped down. We have overall about 93 million left in the amount, and we're only earning about 0.28%. And we're now looking at other opportunities out there as the feds raise the rates. And that's pretty much all I had for that presentation.
Comments? All right. Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action on surplus personal property by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Presiding officer, I would like to pull this agenda item. And I want to go back in and look at these vehicles that were given away in light of the shortage of vehicles. So we will bring this back to the board at a later time.
Very good. We'll be pulling agenda item 10.
Sure disappointed.
Yeah, I wanted to hear him read.
That's disappointing, I'll tell you.
Moving on to agenda item number 11, report and possible discussion on Allen's Creek permitting process, overview by John Peen, Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives Manager by Bill Swanson, Santec Consulting Services, Inc. Hello there.
All right, good morning again. I've had a lot of good conversation today about Allen's Creek, so we felt like it would be a really opportune time to get our partners at Stantec in the room and have some discussion about what the permitting process looks like. Their firm has significant experience with 404 projects and just a wealth of information. In your board packet, there's also a little acronym list because there's a lot of alphabet soup as we go through here, a lot of stuff to keep up with. So reference that as Bill talked us through the process. And just one thing that struck me as I've been through this presentation several times with Bill getting ready for this conversation is just the amount of detail that we need to go into. And I take away something different every time. So I encourage you to engage as we go through the discussion today and ask questions. It's a lot to take in, but it's a big project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill and Lisa, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you.
So let me, Bill, let me interject just a minute.
You bet.
Bill Swanson, Ron Murdoch, they're both with Stantec. 5 or so years ago, we went through a very detailed process of interviewing firms that had put together very large teams. At the time, we thought we were moving forward with the city of Houston, and they were a part of the selection process. After interviews, it was a unanimous decision to hire Stantec and the team that they had put together. Of the 3 or 4 groups that we interviewed, there were probably close to 50 different firms that were represented on all of those teams from all over the country. Stantec has been our engineer for the Tainer Gates. They're an engineer on another project, and this is really in their wheelhouse, permitting and reservoir design and gate design. So we've got a great partner here, and I'm really excited to move forward with Bill and his team, and really excited about what he has to share with you this morning.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this morning about something you probably have heard a lot about and have heard frustrations about the Army Corps of Engineers 404 permitting process. So I want to talk about it today in terms of its applicability to the Allens Creek Reservoir site. But, you know, before I do, I really want to take this moment to acknowledge the staff that we've been working with here. We began working in collaboration with the BRA in 2015. This has been this is a 7-year journey for us.
Oh, I thought it was 5.
It just felt like 5. And all along the way, I have to say, the openness, the willingness to partner, the curiosity, the recognition that we're going to do it the right way has always been the philosophy of the staff. And that's made it a joy to work with. As time has gone on, David and his team have brought additional expertise on that has just made this team stronger. So we couldn't be more proud as a consultant to work really in partnership with the BRA and launch this project, which we know is going to have a lot of ups and downs. It's going to have some roads that we go down that we're not quite sure exactly how we got there. That's the nature of this kind of work. But I'm absolutely confident that the team that we've assembled with the expertise that we're bringing in partnership with the staff that's here, we can get this done. And so we thank you for your support of us, trust in us, and we look forward to kicking off a really successful project. So with that, let me walk into a little bit of what you all got yourself into. So a few months ago, or last month, you took title, or earlier this month, really, you took title of the Allens Creek Reservoir Project. And I imagine a few of you are thinking like, wow, we're now the dog that caught the car. What are we going to do with it, right? So what I want to tell you a little bit about what to expect. We've heard a lot of time sequences. How long do these things take? Can we do it in 3 years? Can we do it in 5 to 7 years? I'll tell you, the time it takes to get a 404 permit is the time it takes to get a 404 permit. And I'm not saying that to try to set up expectations that it's going to take forever. But I can tell you that there's been some projects that didn't go about it in an open-minded way. And they've taken 10 to 15 years to get permits because the way they approached it with the Army Corps of Engineers was very narrow, and they had to go back and redo work and add, often very reluctantly in the assistance of the Corps. What we're proposing to do here is not take that approach. We're proposing to take an approach that's very proactive with the Army Corps of Engineers, anticipate what they want, validate it with them before we even do the work, and get it done as fast as we can. So we minimize any misunderstanding, we minimize the risk of new work or rework, and we minimize the potential for conflict, because nothing is worse in a permitting process than conflict. It drags everything down. So with that, the Allens Creek Reservoir. You all know where this is. I don't need to teach this to you. But what I do want to point out is the importance of this reservoir in the context of managing the water resources for the entire Brazos River Basin. It is a strategically located site in the lower basin that will allow the BRA to do a couple of things. One, to capture floodwaters when they come down the river and store them. Actually, 3 things. Capture floodwaters when they come down the river and store them. capture the water in Allen's Creek itself, and manage the other reservoirs in the system during non-flood periods when it makes sense to strategically move water from upper reservoirs into Allen's Creek to make room for more water in the upper reservoirs, thereby increasing your whole reservoir yield throughout the basin. But most importantly, have a point of release that's very close to some of your largest customers on the coast. And so the location of this reservoir is not new. I think, was it Brad that pointed out to me it was the 1958 plan? So like most big reservoirs, the site was recognized a long time ago as advantageous. The value of it within the context of the reservoir management of the whole basin was understood, but it takes a while to get there. Well, we are there today. So let me zoom in a little bit more on the site itself. What's interesting about this site, when you think about where we are, we're in the coastal plain of Texas. This is a flat area. So the first question that naturally comes to people's minds is, why are you building a reservoir where it's flat? How do you do that? Does that make any sense? Well, what's really attractive about this site is that most of the land is high ground. And so this orientation you see drawn out in yellow here, and I don't know if there's a pointer on here, but you see the orientation drawn out in yellow, the thick yellow line on the right is going to be the dam. The remainder of the site is natural high ground because at one time, many, many, many years ago, that was the boundary of the Brazos River. So as the rivers meandered back and forth, it carved out an escarpment that now is the northwestern and southern boundary of what will become Allen's Creek Reservoir. And so it's a very cost-effective site to develop because building a reservoir that large really only entails closing off 1 out of 4 of its sides, which is pretty unusual in a flat area. Other reservoirs that some of the customers down there may have contemplated would be building a ring dike all the way around, and that's much more costly on a foot of embankment, if you will, per acre foot of storage. So it's very attractive in that way. Also, what I want to point out here is you can kind of see the faint blue line in the very lower part of the reservoir close to Wallace. That's Allen's Creek itself. So Allen's Creek drains a little west of 36 and comes into the Brazos River where that light blue connection is. What the dam will do is impound water that would flow on Allen's Creek, and then we also will pump water from the Brazos River and bring water into it from 2 different directions. So looking a little closer, this is what the facilities would look like. You can see there's the water permit itself that you all now are the sole owners of, specifies some very important details, more actually than what you typically would expect in a water right permit. Sure, it specifies where the reservoir is going to be. It specifies the diversion locations on the river because that's what's important in a water right. It also says how much the diversion rate can be, total amount withdrawn, and what the annual amount that can be taken out. But it goes further. It also specifies the reservoir capacity, what the surface elevation of the reservoir would be, and what the outlet rate would be from the reservoir back to the river. So it's what you'd call a very prescriptive water right that's a bit unusual in most water rights in Texas. There's some advantages to that in terms of the permitting of the project because of the specificity, but that's something we'll take to our advantage as we start working with the Corps. A couple other things I wanted to point out on here is, well, you can see the meander of the river itself, and many of you that are familiar with this part of the basin know this part of the river is very erosive. The banks have become somewhat unstable. We've seen a lot of erosion in the past 10 years, particularly in major flooding events. So as we think about the 2 locations that are specified in the water right permit, we're not obligated to build both of them. We could look one or the other. But as we look at these 2 locations, they're importantly different in terms of the mechanics of the river. As this river wants to move around, we want the pumping plant to stay put, and we want the river to stay at the pumping plant. If the river moves away from the pumping plant, we've got a big problem. And so that's one of the challenges that we'll be getting into from a macro scale point of view, is looking at what you call the geomorphology of the river, or how the river wants to move around under its natural conditions, and what we might need to do to keep the river from moving. And there's an opportunity perhaps to link those types of actions with things that are outside of the reservoir itself, like local flood protection. If there's a value to hardening the banks on the river to keep the river where it is, for the benefit of Allen's Creek, well, that hardening might also be beneficial to the community itself. And so that's part of some of the things that we'll need to take a look at around the risks and the choices on the locations of facilities for the project. Okay, So the system itself is complex. The upper graphic here at the very top shows a simple concept. The river, we'd have an intake on the river, and everyone that's been on the Brazos River knows it's a very sediment-laden river. It's a consequence of it being very erosive. Well, when large flows come down the river and we want to divert those flood flows, we often have a lot of fine and sometimes middle grain sediment, sand, and even gravel carried in the water. Sand and gravel are not good for pumps. And so before we put that water into a pumping plant, we may need to settle it in a sedimentation basin to drop out the coarse material so it doesn't damage the pumps. So the concept on the right here shows this is the intake structure, thinking of it from the perspective of the river so you don't see the water, but get a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here. Sedimentation basins on the backside of that, and then a pumping plant that would take water from the sed basins and pump it through pipelines, through the embankment dam into the reservoir. On the upper left, you see a kind of a concept cross-section of the dam itself. What's important about that is on the left side would be the reservoir. So you'd have protection on the water side in the reservoir, because as the water level goes up and down, you want to protect against erosion. But because this site is also within the within the Brazos River floodplain itself, the downstream side of the dam on the right also has to have flood protection, because the river can come up on the downstream side of the dam. So there might be periods of time when if you fly over this area, you might just see a thin ribbon of the dam with water on both sides of it. That's to be expected, and that's what we have to take into account here in our design. As I said, water will be coming in from Allen's Creek, and when it does, it can run the risk of overtopping the reservoir. We need to protect the infrastructure. We don't want the dam to overtop and wash itself away, so we'll need a spillway on the dam itself to convey those flood flows that will come in from Allen's Creek. And we'll look at different options, either an ungated or a gated spillway. A gated sometimes allows more flexibility, that you can use those gates to hold back water just like you do in all the other dams. Think Lake Limestone, it holds back the water storage. So it's a similar concept. There might be an advantage to using a gated spillway to store that upper part of the reservoir. And then lastly, the lower left thing is kind of hard to see here, but that's one concept for like a combined inlet outlet to the reservoir itself. So water would be pumped in from the pump station and go into the reservoir through that. And then when water is taken back out to go back to the Brazos River, it comes to the same piece of infrastructure, but then be routed back to the river.
Bill, without getting into too much detail, but I had some questions already about when you look at that spillway, talk about your thought process and looking at, is this a potential spillway that generates electricity? Talk about that analysis just real briefly.
Yeah. So the pump station is going to take power. We'll have to pump water up into the reservoir. And so when you think about that from a cross-sectional point of view, the river level will be down here and the reservoir level will gradually go up. So we'll see a difference in the amount of head or the height between the two water surfaces. When you think about hydropower generation, bringing water back, the advantage to what they call pump storage hydropower is that you release water from a known elevation and deliver it to a known elevation, and you have kind of a constant drop all the time. What makes off-channel reservoirs kind of complicated for that is that the water level is going to go up and down in Allen's Creek, and the water level in the Brazos River is going to go up and down as well. And so there may be a period of time when the range is really great, when the river's low and the reservoir's high, and you can generate a lot of power. But there's also going to be periods when the reservoir is not so high and the river is, and you can't generate much at all. And so the economics on these variable head type hydropower pump storage projects often don't tend to pencil out. But we will look at it. At a minimum, for energy recovery, it might be advantageous to use it to offset some of the pumping costs. But as a licensed hydropower project, these things tend not to really pump out too well, or to cost out too well. Does that help, David? Okay. Okay. Yes.
You said you talk about sediment when that comes in from as you separate the water from the sediment.
Yeah.
What do you do with the sediment? You scrape it out and dump it somewhere, or
we'll need to figure that out. And so it really depends on the characteristic of the sediment itself. If it has a lot of organic material, hey, that might be pretty useful for some people. But if it has a concentration of heavy metals, that could be considered a hazardous waste. And so we've got that range of opportunity that we don't know the answer to yet. So that's part of what we have to look at in the sampling.
This area. Do you know? You don't know?
I think Tiffany would know that better than I do right now. We haven't talked about the water quality too much yet.
Hypothetical.
We don't.
That's okay, that's all right.
We don't traditionally pull a lot of sediment samples out of the river itself, but when we have, it usually is high in organics and nutrients, without a high load of toxic volatiles or heavy metals. However, it's something that we will have to study extensively before we come up with a disposal plan, because we will have to approve all that to the federal government.
Indeed, and the state government too.
She's so smart.
Exactly. Okay, so now with all this great interest about the project, now I'm going to turn the page and talk about why do we need a 404 permit. So the Clean Water Act, the Federal Clean Water Act, requires that anybody who excavates or dredge, take something out, or fill, put something in, like construct within a wetland or other waters of the United States. And I don't want to spend a lot of time today getting into the legal definition of waters of the U.S. It tends to have a little bit of a pendulum aspect to it, but we can say with certainty that Allen's Creek and the Brazos River are waters of the U.S., and they will always be deemed waters of the U.S. under the Clean Water Act. We also know there's a number of wetlands within the Allen's Creek Reservoir location that will be impacted by the construction of the project. So any project that does this, touches the waters of the U.S. or fills wetlands, requires a permit. The Clean Water Act specifies that the Army Corps of Engineers is the federal agency that issues 404 permits. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act says is what this is all about. And the Galveston District is the one here in Texas that will be assigned to this project because they administer 404 permits in the coastal plain. So that takes us to who are we dealing with? We're dealing with the Galveston District of the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, that's the easy part. Now comes the part that's going to kind of get your head going, what the heck? And I'm going to come back to this next point a lot because that's kind of the core or the crux of a 404 permit. So the Army Corps of Engineers is obligated by law to only issue a permit for a project that has the minimum impacts, or what they call the least environmentally damaging, practicable, that's a great word, alternative, or LEDPA, L-E-D-P-A. So you're going to see this term LEDPA. It's on your cheat sheet. It's going to come around a number of times because that's the whole thing the Corps pays attention to. What the Corps wants to know is that for you to get what you need out of your project, that the way you are doing it has the least environmentally damaging impacts on waters of the U.S. That's their singular job, is to permit that project, whatever that project is. Our challenge is to demonstrate that Allen's Creek Reservoir is that project. And that's the whole point of a 404 permit, is to find that alignment between what you want to do and what the Corps says we can agree that that is the best way to do it under our Corps legal responsibilities. So I'm going to come back to that a number of times. But the other point I want to make about this is the application itself has to make this case. We have to provide the evidence for the Corps to say, yep, we agree. And the Corps has to be prepared to defend it, because they're the ones issuing the permit. They make the ultimate decision that this project is indeed what they call the LEDPA, and they would issue a permit for it, but then they will be under a lot of scrutiny from other agencies, from the public at large, from the EPA, and if litigation occurs, then from the courts. And they will have to defend their choices. So what the number one mistake in my mind that many project applicants have made when it comes to the Corps of Engineers is they've seen the Corps of Engineers as their adversary. That darn Corps of Engineers, we got to get a permit, we're going to apply political pressure, we're going to make them give us a permit, gosh darn it. And what they don't come to realize sometimes is that the Corps has to defend it as well. And if you can build a collaborative relationship with the Corps from early on, you should think about them as becoming your partner, not your adversary. Okay, so I'm going to get a little deeper into this. I'm going to come back to this, but I want you to ask questions about this because this is what takes a lot of getting used to around what is this permit for and what right does the Corps have. And this is the essence of the Corps of Engineers' right to issue the permit. Okay, so when the Corps does this, they're a federal agency. And so when they issue a permit, they're taking what's called a federal action because they're making a decision to do something that affects the environment. And so any federal agency that makes any decision that affects the environment has to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and produce an environmental compliance document. So NEPA is designed to protect public interest resources, and I'll show you in a moment what all those are. There's a lot of them. And that also includes reaching out to other federal and state and local agencies, reaching out to Native Americans and Indian tribes, and having extensive public participation. So this is where everybody who has an opinion can weigh in on the project, and everybody who has recognized expertise about resources, whether it be fish resources or air quality or endangered species, they're asked formally to weigh in and issue their opinion. So when these NEPA documents are done, they can be done at different levels of involvement. Sometimes they're very perfunctory checklists, very easy to do. But for a project as large as Allen's Creek Reservoir, everybody recognizes what will be required is an environmental impact statement. There's an EIS. Those are the biggest and most complex documents that get produced under NEPA. And then when the Corps of Engineers prepares this document and they finalize it, their final action is what's called a record of decision. They've documented the process they went through, and they've made their choice. They've approved something. They document how they got there. That's where the EPA comes in and reviews those documents for concurrence. So the EPA is actually the audience we're ultimately playing to here. Okay, so let me tell you what the process that the Corps of Engineers goes through. So this is not a flow chart from your perspective. This is the flow chart from the Corps of Engineers' perspective. The very first thing that they do is when they're aware that a permit application is going to be prepared, is they will undertake what they'd call informal consultation with the applicant. You are the applicant. So the BRA is the applicant for the Allen's Creek Reservoir project. While the application is being prepared, the Corps will have a lot of coordination, and we want them to have as much of this as possible because we want them to understand the project. We want them to give us feedback on what they will be expecting. We want to hear their opinions, so when the application is submitted, it's not a surprise to them. It's already answered their questions, and it's complete. So that process, and we'll get into a little bit, is what will take probably 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 or whatever the number is years. There's a lot of work to be done. You'll see why in a moment why it will take that long to prepare this application for the Corps. A lot of field studies that take time. Once they get it, the Corps says, is it complete? Or actually, the first thing it says, is an individual permit needed? And the Corps has the ability to issue what they call nationwide permits for pre-approved activities. This is not one of them. They will need an individual permit that looks at the specific details of the project. We know that that answer is going to be yes. All the conversation we've already had with staff at the Galveston District says, yep, it's going to be an individual permit. You'll need an EIS. Those are foregone conclusions. And so the Corps then, remember, this is the Corps' flow chart. When they get this, the first thing they say is it a complete application? Does it have everything we need to make an evaluation on the environmental effects of the project and the consequences and the mitigation requirements and so on? And if they come up to the answer is no, then they will ask for more information. The way their process is set up is if we respond, you keep doing that loop until they're satisfied. If you don't respond a second time, they terminate. That's not going to happen here. We're going to have a lot of coordination with them. Director Henderson?
How long does it take them, once you've got the application in, to deem it complete?
That's a complete function of how well this coordination works early on.
Okay.
So I've seen projects in Texas where it can take 5 to 10 years to determine an application is complete because of an adversarial relationship between the applicant and the Corps. And the Corps would tell the applicant during the application process, you're going to need this long list of things. And the applicant said, I don't think so. I'm just going to do this. And so they submitted it. The Corps came back with a 25-page letter, said, here's all the things that are missing. The things we told you were going to be missing, they're still missing.
So does this fall under, it's probably more of a question for you, does this fall under that 30-day shot clock bill where they've got to respond within 30 days? And we can take as long as we want?
This first loop is 15 days, and the second one is 30 days. But there's no limit to the number of them.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, yes.
When the application is withdrawn, you have to start the whole process over again?
Yeah, I think this is something that's not going to happen on this project. this is the kind of thing that can happen for small applications where the Corps is completely unaware of what's going on. We're not going to get here on this project. This is the Corps saying we have an unresponsive applicant. You guys are not going to be unresponsive, I can assure that.
So I've been reading a lot about the Nichols Reservoir up there. Are you familiar with that? Or
Yeah.
maybe just as a contrast, that would just help, because they've been having a lot of trouble, but is it because of that adversarial, or there's also very outspoken landowners there in the Sulphur River that are against it?
I don't want to give a firm opinion on what's happening on Robert Nichols, other than you're right, there's been a lot of reasons why there's delay. There's some debate around the need for the project. There's a lot of opposition to the local landowners because the applicant doesn't own the land. And the Corps is looking at it saying, I wonder if there's other ways that the same need for water supply could be satisfied with something else.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question under your project features where the pump station is going to be placed, right? It looks like that's where the river, is there a potential, I don't know if we can go back to that one, but if the river comes together, will that affect that pump station?
It could, yeah.
So is there a better place to kind of, I don't know, I'm not an expert in the field, but I'm just.
You're asking
on the Brazos,
the expert. Perfect question.
So I don't know.
So
I just amplified it, and it looks like, if it comes together, if you go back to
Yeah,
your.
so if this river connects at these 2 points.
Right.
And it just now connects down here, how do you get water back to that?
Right.
One idea is that you could modify that channel to be a backwater channel. That could be actually beneficial.
So is it going to then be another huge $1 million?
Well, that's all part of this.
Yeah, it's all the stuff we need
It's
to
all
look
part
at
of this
now.
huge $1 million, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all the stuff we're looking at. We don't have an answer yet. It's to be investigated. It's one of the things that makes this project so complex. So once all this happens, the Corps then will produce an EIS. The BRA doesn't produce the EIS. The BRA gives the Corps what we think is all the information they're going to need to produce an EIS, but then the Corps actually takes on that process themselves. And so let me go to the next slide that starts at that little circle on the bottom and the beginning of the EIS process. So the Corps then will notify the public, yes?
Is the EIS an in-house document that the Corps does, or they hire a third party to do that part?
You are a smart man. They hire a third party. They typically hire a third party to do that. And so we want to minimize those costs, right? We don't want another consultant coming in and doing the same thing we've already done. We want all the record to be clear, all the content to be complete. The Corps will typically go hire a third-party consultant. However, the Corps doesn't hire them. You hire them. And the Corps tells them what to do. That's right. Yep, that's the second bullet there, yeah.
We'll do this by ourselves. We'll do this with our stakeholders, not the city council.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many 404 permits has your company taken to the Corps of Engineers, and how many of them have been successful?
Oh, I can't tell you how many. We've done many of them. We do 404 permits for almost every project we do, and we do water projects. We do lots of diversions off of rivers. We do reservoirs. We do hydropower projects. Every one of them has 404 permits. We've had, gosh, I can't tell you how many, what the number is. I apologize for that. I don't have that off the top of my head. Hundreds.
Right, and y'all are usually successful on the first or second try?
I'm sorry?
Are y'all usually successful on the first or second try?
We typically are, yeah. One thing that we really emphasize to our clients is the importance of working collaboratively with the Corps. We've worked on projects where the owners have wanted to be more adversarial and say, we refuse to do this, and they've taken ideological positions against the Corps, and those have not gone well. They reach an impasse, and then you have to make a hard choice, either to try to apply political pressure, which typically doesn't work with the Corps because they're a regulatory agency, they're not a political organization, or to finally concede and do what they want. And typically what happens is the organizations finally concede and they do what the Corps says they need. So we all remember that years ago. You can pay me now, you can pay me later, right? That's kind of how the Corps looks at it.
I mean, it's good if you have that good rapport with them already.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've done a lot of work with the Galveston District. Some of the staff that are on our team have worked with the Galveston District for 30 or 40 years. They know the people, they know the requirements, they know the processes, they know how they want the reports formatted, they know what information they're going to be looking for. And we'll couple that with the great relationship that Tiffany and her team have built with not just the Corps, but other regulatory agencies, and build on those relationships.
I mean, since this project has been discussed since the late 50s, I would assume that the Corps probably already has some level of awareness.
They do.
They have some knowledge of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't something that's brand new to them.
Not at all. Their staff is very familiar with this project. Well, they're familiar with the reality that a project application is going to come to them one day. Yeah.
But it's not something that's going to be adversarial from day one. I mean, it's something that they have knowledge of. And
I think that's true, yeah.
I think they've been waiting on us. We've kept a good relationship, and even when we thought it was going to be a 70-30 Houston BRA, Houston and myself went and sat down with the Corps on numerous occasions in Galveston to make sure that they were in the loop on the intent and the timing and all those things. So they know we're coming.
Yeah. So the first thing the Corps does is they get the public notified. They tell the whole world, we're doing this project. They publish it in the Federal Register, and all the resource agencies are contacted. Oh, look at that, I got this now. This is pretty interesting. I'm not sure how I do this. That's okay. The resource agencies get contacted, both state and federal, and this little bubble on the bottom talks about their consultation to get input. And this also involves compliance with the Endangered Species Act. This is where the ESA issues come along with the Fish and Wildlife Service and possibly the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's where the National Historic Preservation Act compliance comes along with tribal interest and cultural and archaeological resources. All these things get captured under this framework. Then they prepare a draft EIS, circulate it to the public, have a hearing on it, move it to a final document, publish a record of decision, and the record of decision is their documentation as to how they got to this determination, and then they issue the permit. So that's the process in a small roadmap that the Corps goes through. This process for the Corps, after they get the application, and if they deemed it complete and they want to begin it, they estimate it's typically a 3-year process for them. But it can take a lot longer if they don't feel like they have all the information they need or conditions change. And there's risks that come along the way. Let's say a new species becomes listed as endangered during this time frame. That sets things back to pick up additional information regarding that. That's why what Tiffany and her team are doing and anticipating what might happen with species, why that's so important. So we can anticipate these things before they occur. So let's talk about those agencies. There's a long list of them. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them yourself. But the point is, every one of these agencies has an important role in the EIS process for the Corps, which means for us, every one of these agencies has a very important role in the pre-application consultation. We want to meet with them all, not just once, but numerous times to talk over what are their concerns, what species of concern do they want to make sure are tracked, what measuring and monitoring protocols will we use and apply to make sure that we know whether we've detected their presence or not, what models will we use, what data will we use, how will we evaluate it, what parameters we'll compare. So as we do all of our analysis, the information that's prepared is presented in a way that anticipates the needs of all these ultimate reviewers that will be weighing in on the project.
Permitting process?
They do. They do. The Corps of Engineers asks their opinion.
Okay.
And I want to point out for the record and for those that are watching on YouTube, because there's a lot of discussion about the impacts of Allen's Creek on flooding. And you'll see there are other federal agencies that FEMA is included in flood hazards will be evaluated.
Yep. Yeah, Tiffany was reminding me there's authorizations that will be needed along the way for their participation as well. And so this doesn't just happen on day one. The Corps has to develop MOUs and agreements between these agencies to get them involved. They've got to document what their scope and responsibility is going to be. So it's very formalized. It's very trackable. The whole point behind this is to have a very defensible, what they call record of decision, or they call it the administrative record, is what the Corps calls it, because that's the file boxes that the attorneys will haul into court to prove that they've done their due diligence, if they find themselves in that situation. So it's all about building this rock-solid administrative record. Okay, I'll keep going. So the kind of information the Corps needs then, I'm stepping back now to where we are today, and we're going to prepare the application. So in order for the Corps to review an application, what has to be in it? So the application itself is a relatively simple form. You can fill it out in an afternoon. But most of what it's going to say in that afternoon is see attached, see attached, see attached. And so the form might be 4 or 5 pages. The see attached might be 5,000 to 10,000 pages. And that's how these things are done. So what the Corps needs, the first thing they need is a project description. What are you going to do? And this sounds kind of simple, right? I just gave you a project description, didn't I? You saw that early on in here. You've seen the project description for Allen's Creek Reservoir. That's not going to be sufficient. What the Corps needs to start with is, why is this project needed, and what purpose will it achieve? And that sounds kind of, I don't know, nebulous. What it really boils down to for this project is, what's the role of the Allen's Creek Reservoir in meeting the long-term water management needs of the Brazos River Basin? How much water supply will it provide? What operational flexibility will it produce? And that becomes the need for the project. And so I'll walk you through in a moment the process that we get from that broad need to how we actually get to a project itself. But then we look at the facilities, right? So all the facilities, the things that I just showed you, have to be developed to a pretty good level of engineering design. Far more than the cartoon images that I showed on here. We will need them probably at somewhere, I hate to use percentages in engineering design, but if you think about designing a project, it's somewhere in the ballpark of like a 20 to 30% level of completion for a design project. So a lot of information. You know, all the geotechnical information, the hydraulic analysis, the structural computations, what material you're going to use, all the computation of forces to figure out your project. And then even more than that, they want to know, and then what material, what's going to be filled, right? What wetlands, what waters of the U.S. will be impacted, and to what extent. Then, what comes along with that is the aquatic resources inventory. How are you going to affect the waters of the U.S.? How many wetlands will be filled and no longer wetlands? What open waters, what shellfish beds could be impacted? Then the third one sounds small, but it's huge. This is the anticipated effects to public interest resources. This is the long list of 20 or I think 23 different resource areas that get evaluated to quantify their effects from the project. And that's for not just building the project, but that's the temporary effects. So any construction-related activities like lay-down yards or temporary roads or borrow pits, all those things are part of the project, as well as the long-term operational effects. So taking water from the Brazos River, putting water back into the Brazos River, what effect does that have on the environment? And then lastly, and this is the proof, this last bullet, the explanations and supporting analysis to prove that you've tried to do everything in your power to avoid or minimize the impacts to the environment. Minimize the impacts to wetlands, minimize the impacts to aquatic resources, minimize the impacts to waters of the U.S., and that you've taken measures, you've given thought to how you might compensate for the impacts that you're going to produce in the end. And all of this is about that evidence of what's the project, why do you need it, is it the right project, does it minimize the impacts, can you prove that, and then if it indeed is, what are you going to do to mitigate those impacts? So if you boil it down, it kind of comes down to 3 basic questions the Corps has to answer through this process. And for the case of this project itself, the first one, is a new water supply needed? And you all said, of course a new water supply is needed. Okay, that sounds easy to say. If we look at the state water plan, the regional water plans, yeah, this project's been in the water plan for decades. We know we need it, it's coming online. The answer is not as straightforward as yes. There's proof that's needed, and that goes back to what's the purpose and needs section of this application is what addresses that. The second is what are the impacts that are going to be caused by the project? That's all in this project description and impacts analysis. And then the key one for the Corps is are there other ways that this water supply could be developed without as much of an impact? And that's this alternatives analysis, this LEDPA. So I want to make one little note on the bottom here. This is, I think you've all kind of captured this in our dialogue already. But when we talk with the staff at the Corps of Engineers, they don't come across to me or others as being anti or pro-project. They really don't take a position on the project. And that's their job. Their job is not to take a position on a project. Their job is to follow the law. And so when you talk with them, this is what they will say. Our role is neither proponent nor an opponent of a project. Our role is to ensure compliance and that we've checked the boxes, we've turned over every stone, we've looked at every requirement that we have under the 404 section of the Clean Water Act and all of our guidelines, requirements, and principles. We followed NEPA completely. We followed the Endangered Species Act. We followed the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. We've done all the things that are required of us, and we can support the conclusion. And I want to keep reinforcing that point because that's the philosophy of the Corps. It's easy sometimes to think, oh, they just don't want the project because they're being hard, they dig their heels in, they're being obstinate. Most of the times the Corps staff are being obstinate, not always, but most of the time the Corps staff is being obstinate is because there's a disagreement on what is needed. And we're going to have some of those with them. We're not going to just bend over and say, tell us what you want and unload a dump truck in their office. We're going to have debates about, is this really needed? And we're going to come to a concurrence with them on an appropriate level of information, sufficiency, right methods, and so on. So I want you to understand, we're here to work for the project and work for you. We're not going to give them everything they ask on day one. We're going to work through with them and say, is it really necessary to come to a concurrence that this indeed is necessary, and it's what they say is supportable. Okay, so why do they fail? What makes these things go off the rails? One of four things. The first is the need for the project is either not clear or it's not supported in the evidence provided. And that sends the Corps back saying, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. The second is something different than what you're proposing is found to be this least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. In other words, you could get what you want by doing something different that harms the waters of the U.S. less. The Corps doesn't have the legal authority then to permit your project. The third, incomplete assessment of resources. We just didn't feel like surveying half the site because we surveyed half of it, found nothing. We just drew a conclusion the other half must be the same. And it's not going to work. They want proof that everything's been looked at and they've got a complete inventory of the assessments that are needed. And then lastly, mitigation. So we're looking at a big project. We're going to inundate, 7, 8, 9,000 acres of land. We're going to change the interface of the Brazos River in that part of the basin. It's going to have an effect on environmental resources. And so a mitigation will be needed to offset the adverse effects that the project causes. Now, we don't need a mitigation project proposed as part of the application, but what we do need is a mitigation strategy. We need to tell the Corps we've looked at mitigation banks and here's what might be available, and if not, we've also looked preliminarily at other possible areas in the basin, and we think that there's a probability that one could be developed, a site could be obtained and developed sufficiently to meet the mitigation needs. Again, we don't need it as part of the application, but they want to know that you've given enough thought to it that it's not such a high risk that permitting the project would then fail if you can't properly mitigate for it. Okay. So how do we get there then, right? So this purpose and need, you kind of get the sense is pretty important, right? It's kind of the cornerstone of a 404 application. It's the cornerstone of a NEPA document. So the first you have to say, what's the need for a water supply? Well, we'll work with Aaron and his team on that. We know there's a need for the project. We're hearing it from your customers as well. But then the question is that need defined in such a way that there's a limited choice of options that can be used to fulfill it? So, for example, a simple way to think about it is a reservoir needed? Not just the reservoir, is a reservoir needed that might help fulfill that need? And if so, then we go further to demonstrate that Allen's Creek is the one that meets that requirement. So it's kind of a winnowing process or peeling away the unknowns to get to this determination. There's a lot more to this process than this simple slide depicts, but that's the philosophy that we go through. So to establish the need then, it becomes a balance of supply and demand. And you all have seen this before in the regional water plan analysis. This is what the state does every 5 years. However, the Corps will not find that to be sufficient for the purpose of this project. And partly because the way the state water plan and regional plans are developed is they look at the needs for large regions, and they don't necessarily flag specific customers. And they recognize the region's going to grow. Here's the growth projections of the region. Here's the portfolio of solutions. We have a plan for how we're going to address those needs. When it comes to the Corps of Engineers permitting a single project, saying to permit the Allen's Creek Reservoir, they will want to know, well, who exactly is going to take that water? And so what they'll want is evidence from the end customers that there's a legitimate need for that water. And so what we've seen in Texas is that the 404 permits that anchor solely on the regional water plan estimates as the basis for the project need is the Corps of Engineers turns that back and says that is not sufficient detail for us to say conclusively that we see the need for the project because we don't know exactly who's going to get the water. So that's an important issue that I think will become very important for all of you, particularly as you talk to some of your constituents around the regional needs for this project. We will need that evidence that there is a legitimate and provable need for the water supply. That can come from development plans, that can come from investment plans, but it's more than just saying, well, page 26 of the regional water plan said we needed 100,000 acre feet, so there you are. I've seen a couple of projects in Texas take that approach, and that's part of where the adversarial relationship with the Corps of Engineers developed, is the lack of understanding of the difference between this generalized information in the state plan and the detail that they're looking for at a project level. But this is the approach that we will go through. And so it's, again, this goes back to this whole WOTUS thing, right, and this LEDPA thing. So the attitude, this is maybe sometimes where people feel a little, I don't know, the Corps can be a little tough to work with. And the reason that they can be tough to work with is they start with the presumption that you don't need your project. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what they start with. They start with a rebuttable presumption that says there must be a better alternative to meet your need. Because that's what they're being challenged on. They're being challenged on, you don't need to go flood these wetlands. You don't need to hurt these fish. You could do something different to get the needs of the project. And often people will come back and say, can't water conservation solve this problem? I'm going to go back to this slide because I want to point out to you that water conservation is considered part of a demand. And we do that very deliberately, that it's not a supply. It's how you develop your demand and you build in what conservation practices are going to be taking place before you figure out what your total demand is and then look at your supplies. Often we will hear from interest groups that conservation is a source of water supply. It is not. It's a way of managing your demand. And the Corps sees it that way as well. So let me keep going then. And so when we look at the alternatives then, one alternative obviously is going to be Allen's Creek Reservoir. But what are the other alternatives we are going to look at? We'll have a number of things that we may be looking at in the lower basin. And when we look at them to meet NEPA, because we need to do this, we need to give them a document that walks through all this rationale as to how do you get to say that Allen's Creek Reservoir is the permittable project. And we've got to do two tests. One that's for NEPA, and that's kind of a common sense, reasonableness test, feasible, technical, but this practicable is where the Corps of Engineers comes into play. And they look at things, they look at cost, they look at existing technology, and they look at logistics. And so some of the factors that we will contemplate around this project are the BRA already owns about 85% of the land in this site. And so developing a different reservoir site would mean buying 100% of that land. You already have a water right to divert water off the Brazos River and impound the flows on Allen's Creek. Going to a different location would mean getting a new water right to do that somewhere else. As far as technology, I don't think that's going to be a big player, not around this project, but there might be other technologies that could be contemplated. For example, well, can't you just build an ocean desal plant on the Gulf Coast and provide 100 or 200,000 acre feet of water with that? When you start looking at cost, that becomes very cost prohibitive for the scale of project that Allen's Creek Reservoir is. Okay, I'm not going to take you through all of this, but this is a big deal in terms of how we get to this 20 or 30% design for our project. So when I think about the engineering team, this is what the engineering team will be doing. They're going to start with concept level layouts, sort of the stuff that I showed you, but more detail than that. To get basic sizes and the operations of how much water gets taken in, taken out, what probable maximum flood do we need to think about on Allen's Creek for the spillway design, and so on. That's going to set up the initial field investigations. And this is just the geotechnical and the engineering field investigation. Surveys, river sediment, bathymetry in the vicinity of the intakes around that part of the river where it's meandering. What does the bottom of that river look like? You can't see it, right? So we'll need some sensors to get depth gauges and measure the bottom of the river in that location. Then geotechnical investigations, we'll have drill rigs and cone penetrometer machines out there all over the site. Well, just to do that, just to do those activities, to put that equipment on the site to do the testing, we will need environmental clearances. Because we're probably going to have to build a road on the site along the dam alignment or scrape it out, so we don't have a jungle in some areas. We'll need access. We'll need to look at the environmental impacts of just putting a drill rig out there, and is that going to harm certain species? Are there certain times in the year that we can't be there because of nesting or life cycle requirements of the species? Are we going to be drilling in wetlands, and if so, then what's our mitigation for doing that? So all these, just taking a drill rig out requires environmental planning in advance. So that process itself takes a little time to get ready for. Once that information comes back, and that takes some time, right? We're probably looking at dozens of borings, lots of samples at different levels, a lot of laboratory testing to understand the geotechnical conditions of the soil. That becomes the input then to the first real engineering on that long list of facilities. What foundation conditions do we need to concern ourselves with? How would vibration of the pumping plant require different foundation conditions? Do we need deep piles? Can we do it on something shallower? I'm not going to read them all, but the borrow sources is an important one. Do we have material on the site that's going to be conducive to building a dam? We think that's the answer is going to be yes, but that's really an important component to it. And depending on the material itself, will the dam be this shaped or this shaped, right? It will be very tall and narrow or very wide because of its stability. Because we can build anything with anything, it just depends on how much of it we need. Yeah.
I understand this. I've kind of even dealt with it a little bit myself in my career, but if you're looking at 20 to 30% of actual engineering done for the alternative that you're advocating,
yeah,
and they say, well, this could be another alternative, how could they compare it if you don't have 20 to 30% of the engineering for the other alternative? And they can't really expect you to do that, can they?
They do not. Well, what they expect you to do is a sufficient level of analysis to screen it out.
Okay.
And so part of what we think about is, well, no, you don't need 30% level of design detail for all these other alternatives. You won't get temporary entry permits from private property owners to go do this in the first place. So it's impractical to do that. So we have to look at available information, get what limited new information we can get, and then use that as the basis for comparisons. And so a lot of this alternatives analysis is kind of a combination of technical and
black magic, yeah,
art form. Okay, well after we get our initial design step, we know what's going to happen. Anytime you design an engineering project, you collect a bunch of information and you start your designs, and there's invariably going to be some data gaps. And you don't know what data gaps you're going to have until you look at the data you have, right? And you say, oh, gee, we look at the substrata and we see this big change from one location to another, and we don't know where it changes or why it changes. We need to go out and take some additional data to understand what's causing this difference. Things of that sort. So we expect there will probably be a secondary set of field investigations to help us confirm our assumptions on facility locations and sizes, foundation conditions, materials, borrow sites, and so on, and construction areas. That then gets us to what I would call a permit level of design. This is your 20 to 30%, the second to last column. And that's what goes into the permit application. So that project description has a lot of stuff, as you can see. It's not just the facilities. Look down, construction methods and durations, even construction equipment. What kind of equipment are you going to use? Are you going to run it for 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, during what season? Because they have to look at the impacts on air quality, impacts on traffic, impacts on the species in the area. So you really have a very thorough project description just to get to the permit application. We know after the permit is issued, there will be conditions on that permit. And so the final design will come after that. We may be progressing final design during the permit processing, but the true final design doesn't happen until the permit's in hand. And getting to that final design might still require even some further fine-tuning investigations. Okay. One way to think about this work early on is the interrelationship between how we operate the project, like the water operations, the intake, the taking water from the river, putting it back, the integration with all the reservoirs in the Brazos Basin as a whole, and delivery to your customers. The infrastructure requirements, so what's the capacity required to take water out, what are the head conditions, what are the power requirements, all the things that go into designing a structure, and then the environmental effects. And this is a little bit of an iterative loop among our team, because we want to design infrastructure that minimizes the impacts to the environment. So as we get information about environmental resources, there's going to be avoidance measures that we'd want to take. Say, oh, we have this dam alignment, gosh, it goes right through a wetland. What if we moved it 200 feet to avoid that? Is that going to save us something in the permitting? And we have to demonstrate that, and those adaptations then get built into our designs as we progress our way to the permit application. So there's going to be a lot of interface between the operations analysis and the detailed hydrology and hydraulics, like the water quality in the river, the water quality in the reservoir. We take water out of the river. It's going to it'll look like chocolate milk, it always does. You put it into the reservoir, it's going to sit in the reservoir. Eventually, that's going to settle out. So we're going to have this nice blue water in the reservoir with a layer of clay on the bottom of it eventually. But that's a relatively shallow reservoir, and so what's going to happen to that water? Is it going to get warmer? Probably. Will it be warmer than the river? It could be. When we put it back in the river, how does that temperature difference have an effect on aquatic species? When water is sitting in the reservoir, is the dissolved oxygen going to decay? And when you put it back in the river, is that going to create a dissolved oxygen demand? Do we need to aerate the water before we put it? We don't know the answer to these questions yet, but these are the things we'll be thinking about as we evaluate the environmental effects, the operational effects, and the infrastructure requirements. So this little thing on the upper left there is kind of the DNA of how we do our work. So let me talk a little bit about the kinds of public interest resources that can be affected. There's a long list of them. I've only highlighted a few of them here. So of the water-based ones, I'm not going to read these all in detail, but the couple that I want to point out is this surface water hydrology, the things that I just mentioned about timing and quality of water. The effects on groundwater. So when we build the reservoir and we put standing water in that floodplain around that high ground, what does that mean to the groundwater below that high ground? Does that cause the risk of localized flooding or damaging buried infrastructure? We have to take that into account. And then the aquatic species, I think you kind of got the sense of how that's going to work, right? As we look at the design and operation, construction and operation of the facilities, how does that affect the aquatic species in a whole? And what we don't know is how far downstream do we need to go? When we think about taking water out of the Brazos River, how far downstream will that reduction in water be visible relative to not taking it out? Or when will the flows become attenuated, that's the term, to the point where it's imperceptibly different? And then when we put water back in, same thing. How far downstream do we need to follow our effects? Do we need to follow them to the saltwater barrier? Do we need to follow them all the way into the Gulf of Mexico? We don't know. That's part of what the modeling will tell us when we start looking at the changes in the river that the project will cause. And if you look at the land-based resources, terrestrial plants, animals, habitat, right, that all makes sense. Cultural resources is in this slide deliberately vague. You'll see that in a second. But you can read these yourself. I'm not going to dwell upon these, but these are most of the other topics that we'll need to address in preparing our environmental assessment information that we give to the Corps. Okay, so biological resources, Tiffany's favorite. This little map on the left is a very generalized map. You can see the light green is the outline of Allen's Creek Reservoir itself. You can see the upper part of it, the overlay with some wetlands. All the dark blue lines are existing streams or waterways. And so when we think about mitigation of the impacts that are caused by the project, there's a counting of things. feet of impacted stream, acres of impacted wetlands, and if there's other habitat, we'll have to address that as well. And so that's just an example on the left of what it looks like when we're going to put people out in the field evaluating the quality of that habitat. And the reason why I mentioned the word quality is because when we design a mitigation requirement, it's all about offsetting the adverse effects to the habitat based on its quality. So you might call it like habitat quality units or something along those lines, where depending on the nature of the habitat, you can see that's like a riparian woodland that's showing up in the upper left. There might be open fields as well. So you don't want to be obligated to mitigate for 9,000 acres of something on the upper left if what is really out there doesn't look like that. So when we come to defining a mitigation requirements, it's an accounting of all the affected resources so that when we design a mitigation site or pick a mitigation strategy, we have offsets for each of those quantified resources within a comparable level of quality. And then for endangered species, I'm not going to dwell upon this a lot, but there's a couple that are shown there. One is a toad that might be present. It's at least the location of Allen's Creek Reservoir is within the range. We have a low expectation of finding one of those frogs out there. But what's important about it is to do these surveys. Some of these surveys require very specific hydrologic and weather conditions. Like it had to rain within the past 9 days. And the humidity has to be between like 65 and 83%. And the temperature has to be between 80 or 58 and 75 degrees or something along those lines. And you do the surveys at night. And so when you do a survey for a species and you don't detect them, most of the protocols require you do it again. So if we find that the toad is not present one year, that'd be great. Then we got to come back the next year and prove it again. And we may have to come back a third year and prove it again. And in each one of those times, all these conditions need to exist. So there's a lot of uncertainty about when you can actually do some of these things. That's part of what gets into this range of time, why it's so challenging to say it's going to take exactly this much time.
And we're responsible for the time and resources to prove.
Yeah. Yep. And then lastly, for cultural resources, what we'll eventually find out at the site is a lot of people looking like that, dragging things around, walking the entire site. These are called pedestrian surveys, and they're sampling for what they can visually see and detect in shallow geophysical conditions as there's something underneath the ground. Now, there's a lot of cultural resource sites that have already been identified around Allen's Creek Reservoir. Almost all of them are at the high water line, at the high ground, because, I don't know, it was flooded. It'd be pretty hard to live in the floodplain, and if you did live in the floodplain, it's very likely that the things you had there probably got washed away. So the things that stayed were the things up on the high ground, which is the shoreline of our reservoir. So there's a lot of inventory of information that we'll need to do there. There's a few cemeteries that are along that top boundary. There's a number of known archaeological and cultural resources sites. And so a big part of our work then is doing that inventorying, including the potential of proving the negative by doing an exhaustive amount of surveying around the reservoir site to demonstrate that we've looked, and if we don't find anything, to demonstrate we've looked, document we found nothing. Oh, there's a pretty thorough process then for how you go about classifying them. A project is not necessarily stopped simply because you find something. There's a cataloging, there's often removal, relocation, museuming. You can store things or preserve them. Cultural resources can become fatal flaws to projects. Typically, it's more of the significant documentation that's required and reaching out to the ancestors of the tribal peoples who lived here and connect with them and make them aware of what's going on.
Quite a bit of that there.
Yeah. So lastly, I know you all want to get to lunch, is where are we going to go from here? So our first step, working with your staff, is to finalize our contract. As you can see, we've given a lot of thought to this already. We have a lot of information that we've already put together in terms of how we're going to do this work. Some of it we put together 6 years ago, so we're dusting it off. So, and then the very first thing we do once we get this contract structured is we put together a detailed schedule for you all. You saw in the draft budget today, funding for Allen's Creek Reservoir over the next few years. That's not based on anything that we've put together yet. And so I think what will become really valuable to you is when we put together this overall detailed schedule, resource loaded, you can see what we think our cash flow and expenditure rates are going to be over the next several years as we do this work, and what all the assumptions are around them, and we'll be able to report to you on a regular basis how we're doing and if things have changed and why they've changed. I mean, my opinion is it's crucial that you all understand what's going on a pretty regular basis, and have a seat at the table about the direction this project is taking. Then the two next items really go kind of hand in hand: public outreach and initiating this coordination with the Corps. We want to talk to the Corps as early as possible and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this now. We're going to get ready for an application. Here's our plan so far. Tell us, give us your feedback on it. What, in your opinion, are we missing? We hope to hear nothing, but we'll hear something, I'm sure. How would you like to be engaged? How do they want to reach out to other agencies? We want this to be a very proactive application preparation process. Again, we want to minimize the risk of surprises after the application goes in. Then we'll move into the conceptual project layouts and then start defining those field studies. And that's what I've laid out so far in terms of our next steps. The next steps for the whole thing is everything I just presented. So this is what I see us doing in the next, I guess, 6 to 9 months. And so with that, just open it up for.
I have a comment, question. Number one, thank you very much for the detail process, the layout of what we anticipate over the next several years. My question, David Collingsworth, to you, is it John King that's going to make sure that Bill and his team are accountable for the timeline that's being established? You know what I am about not dragging on projects. So I want to make sure that we're checking off things along the way.
Yep.
Yes, ma'am. That's the plan.
You should say yes.
So is that John?
Board and the rest of the management. Absolutely.
So John, that's you?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Okay.
yes.
I know I gave you a lot of information today. I've been to these meetings, I know you can handle it. But please, I also know that the first time you hear this, it can be overwhelming. And I don't expect you all to walk away with a deep understanding and knowledge of this. I just wanted to expose you to the issues the way we see them and the way we plan to work with the Corps. I think it's going to be important as we move this work along to have regular conversations with you all and let you know what we're doing and what we're finding. And we plan to do that.
All right, thank you. Nice, appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at this time.
So moved.
Director Henderson, second by Director Huber. All in favor?